Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome back. The leaders from Hamas, Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad were meeting in Beirut today, holding talks under the portraits of Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei. Khamenei says the United States is instructing Israel to bomb Gaza, and the IDF says Iran was directly involved in the Hamas massacre of Israeli civilians on October 7th. Let's find out what is happening in the north. Our Pia Steckelbach is at Israel's northern border. Pia, what's going on?
Right, Laura. A couple of hours ago, 4 rockets were launched into Israel from southern Lebanon. We're talking about the area of Kiryat Shmona, which is at the eastern side of the Israel-Lebanon border. 4 rockets launched there. They fell into open area and were not intercepted as per protocol. No reports about casualties or injuries there, as this is also one of the areas that has been evacuated over the course of the last 2 weeks. Only a couple of days ago, the evacuation started there in Kiryat Shmona, as these areas so close, only a few kilometers far away from the Lebanese border, are deemed to be extremely dangerous right now for civilian movement. We're here, and I want to bring this to your attention, in the city, or in the more to say town of Shlomi, which is about 2 or 3 kilometers away from the Lebanese border. This has been one of the first localities to be evacuated already in the first week of the war here, as residents also largely followed the order. There are very, very few people here. Shops, gas stations, everything closed here. Laura, you brought up that meeting between Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, together with the chief of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Ziad al-Nakhle, and one of the major or most official Hamas leaders there, Saleh al-Aruri. That meeting taking place, discussing, that was what it was announced under, discussing the next steps in that operation and that sensitive phase here of that war, saying that the goal is to bring about the victory of the resistance in Gaza there. That after Hassan Nasrallah has met with the Iranian foreign minister only a few days ago, and we have seen that Hezbollah over the course of the year has been trying to really connect the fronts here. And the rocket that was launched from Gaza today in the afternoon hours onto the city of Haifa is the best example there. Hamas also not only targeting Israel south, but also showing that it has the capability to also try and strike as far as Haifa, which it used a long-range missile that can reach up until 160 kilometers. We're talking about a rocket that has exploded in the air. Also there, no injuries or casualties.
Pia, thank you very much indeed. Pia Steckelbach there at Israel's northern border. Let me introduce our guests this hour. Brigadier General Israel Relik Shafir is the former commander of the Tel Nof Air Force Base and a former combat pilot in the Israeli Air Force. Welcome to you. We're also joined on the line from Manama tonight by Abdullah Al-Junaid, Bahraini columnist and geopolitical analyst. Great to see you, Abdullah. And with us as well, Iran expert and senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Behnam Ben Taleblu. Welcome, Behnam, as well. Relik, I'll start with you if I can. As if we needed any proof, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad sitting together under a portrait of the Ayatollah, all working in concert to attack Israel.
I'm not sure they're talking in concert to attack Israel, but they're certainly discussing how to manage the situation at this time. I think Hezbollah understands that with Israel's resolve as shown along the border at this time, and the American warships sailing in the eastern Mediterranean, they would be hit very hard, not just by the Israeli Air Force, but might as well be hit by U.S. planes. This is an open threat to Iran not to foster any hostilities from Hezbollah beyond the skirmishes along the northern border. And also, who knows what goes on at the Hormuz Straits close to Iran. So
this is the Iranian-controlled shipping straits.
Yes. And so I think they might be discussing what they should do next or what their steps are, rather than actually planning on how to attack.
All right, Abdallah Al-Junaid, how was that message in Beirut today received in the Arab Gulf states? I know they were having important economic talks today, but how will it be interpreted, do you think?
I agree totally with Alec. What he said is correct. I believe the U.S. have delivered a very clear message. If Hezbollah, escalate, I think the response is not going to be just Israeli, but it's going to be definitely American. And that's why we have two strike groups in the Med now. And we've seen what took place 4 days ago when the U.S. naval presence in the Red Sea have intercepted, along with the Saudis, few cruise missiles plus a few drones. So the message and the states within the region are on high alert, and Iran better, heed to the clear diplomacy that it shouldn't escalate further.
Behnam, do you think that Iran will be deterred at all, or will be rethinking its calculations when it sees this strong response from the United States? Do you think Tehran was expecting that strong response from the United States?
By Washington yet. I believe there are strong political signals being sent. I believe Washington has significantly improved its counter-Iran policy, at least in the very, 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 very short term, as it relates to Iran's chief proxy in the Levant, Hezbollah. But make no mistake, earlier this year, for example, the commander of Iran's IRGC aerospace force talked about how previously in the world, when a U.S. carrier would even move towards a region, the government that carrier was intended to would fall. I'm paraphrasing his quote. Now I'm sure that both the patron and the proxy see the need to have two carriers in the region as a boon to deter a non-state actor. So in essence, even though there are clear political signals being sent, and even though potentially the conflict in Gaza does have the potential to remake U.S.-Iran policy, Iran and its proxies are still coasting on risk tolerance, not risk aversion. And in fact, they're trying to create two different conflict circles or conflict clusters, one targeting Israel and one targeting the U.S. And if you look at what else is happening in the region, Iraq, Syria, and potentially Yemen, that anti-U.S. one is designed to step up to separate Washington and Jerusalem. So I don't think one should be taking a victory lap on messaging just yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, thank you, Bennett. Well, Israel's national security chief has praised the diplomatic efforts of Qatar. A reminder, Qatar hosts the Hamas leadership. It's also been instrumental in the release of hostages so far. Meanwhile, the Bahraini foreign minister said during economic talks in Saudi Arabia that the war between Israel and Hamas must not be allowed to derail the economic progress that started under the Abraham Accords. And at that same meeting, the Saudi foreign minister was stopped by journalists, and he had this to say.
Can I just ask you, what is the first thing that has to happen in order to achieve peace, in your view?
Well, right now we need a ceasefire.
Beyond that, though?
We need to restart the peace process.
Is that possible?
It has to be possible. If we are not willing to overcome all the difficulties, all the challenges, all the history that is involved in this issue, then we will never have a real peace and security in the region. So we must restart the peace process.
Do you think the
Arabs have shown clearly, have shown that they are serious, have shown that they are willing to engage? We are ready. We hope that we can do it soon.
Do you believe the Israelis are serious?
So, Abdallah, a couple of questions for you. Firstly, that's Bahrain and also Saudi Arabia, who have kind of alluded to the Abraham Accords and kind of implied that they do want them to continue. And also a word on the comments by the Saudi foreign minister there. Is he setting the kingdom up to take a leading role in what will happen post-Hamas, do you think? And when he says the Arabs, is he referring to the Arabs in the Gulf or more broadly in the region?
Laura, I'm sorry to say, but the Israelis are very, very slow in picking up their signals from Saudi Arabia when it's come to really reading and understanding what the Saudis are messaging you directly and indirectly, and also through a lot of, other diplomacies. Officially, Israel have participated in two events all three events in Riyadh. The Israeli national anthem was played in Riyadh, and the flag was raised. But you continue, or the Israelis continue to demand that it's only the Israeli way or no way. What you need to do is, develop your tools, reapproach differently sometimes.
Can you elaborate on that for us? What do you mean by that? The Israelis need to change their position?
What more? The Saudis have tabled a peace initiative since 2002. Name me one prime minister that have acknowledged that this could be the way forward. None.
Well, Ehud Olmert made a very generous offer, didn't he, to the Palestinians in 2008? It was rejected by Mahmoud Abbas.
Put it this way, at the present time, the Israelis and the Palestinians are the victims of Netanyahu policies for the last 16 years. No Mahmoud Abbas, nor the Israelis were in a good position or positive position to start to do something serious about it. What we are talking about is a total new discourse for us to engage directly in finding a solution. This is not just an Israeli-Palestinian issue, it's a regional issue. Mm-hmm. You have partners in this, and we could definitely, if we come around, starting with Gaza, we could do something differently. Even when it's come to Iran proxies. Most of those proxies have been labeled or, categorized as terrorist organization. Why don't, the United States ask its ally within the region to work together in sending Iran a clear message by taking action against those proxies in Iraq and Syria?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Abdallah. Relek Shafir, you'd like to respond?
Yes. We're talking about what Samuel Huntington called clash of civilization. When they say this, what do they mean? And we're talking East and West. We're talking different cultures, different use of phrases and language. So when the Saudis offered their peace their peace, and when in 2008, as alluded to, Olmert offered what he thought was almost everything to Mahmoud Abbas.
96%, I think, of the territory they wanted?
Now, Mahmoud Abbas is not in a position to accept any offer unless it's shoved down his throat by the Arabs and the Israelis, so that he can say, I was forced to accept this. He cannot accept it on his own because he wouldn't have the support of his people. So sometimes, just like ourselves, Israelis would not accept the hesitation of the move unless we understood that this is mandated by Biden. So we need to read between the lines and behind the front page. What do you mean when you say? And for this, you need people who can understand both languages and not get lost in translation.
So do you, to a certain extent, agree with what Abdallah said?
Yes, he is actually...
And do you foresee a greater role for the Gulf Arab states in bringing peace to the region?
Well, let's think about it this way. There are 2.5 million people in Gaza. They're not going anywhere. But Gaza is too small to house 2.5 million people. There was an offer, by the way, which was popped up by Assisi as well, to enlarge Gaza up to El Arish, about 5 times the size, and go on an international, an Arab-backed program to actually settle the Gazans in a much wider area.
That doesn't seem to be getting much traction.
Well, in lieu of disarmament and control by the Palestinian Authority and an international community. This is what they're talking about, I think, when they're saying the Arabs should be part and parcel. And for Israel, it'll be some kind of a pill to swallow. But Biden actually said, have a plan. What do you mean to do after you topple Hamas? For this, Israel is not really, I would say, emotionally prepared at this time.
All right. Benim, I want to get to you in a second, but I'd just like to get Abdullah's response to that briefly.
Put it this way, at the present time, what we need is something like a total candid discussion. We know very well that the Israelis are not hesitant about going into Gaza militarily, but they know that behind the international support, everybody is telling Israel, and the Israelis now are even the Americans are publishing that or leaking that deliberately, telling them, you are going to create a bigger mess by going into Gaza. So hold your horses. Let us manage this crisis differently. We have other stakeholders. They could come into play and be, let's say, a real partner in a different Gaza. Israel can't manage Gaza on its own. The Palestinian Authority don't have what it takes to manage a real transitional plan within Gaza. So definitely, you'll need the strategic allies, and the GCC and Saudi, I mean, are the best. They and Egypt. You have Jordan, and you have the American and the European now. Everybody is willing to come in as part of the solution, but Israel need to change the narrative as well.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Abdullah. Benim, if I could come back to you, because I mean, the theory is, isn't it, that the Ayatollah wanted to derail the peace process between Israel and the Gulf Arab states, and that is why he planned all of this and launched this offensive. If that was the plan, he will be very disappointed to hear about the Gulf Arab states saying they want to take a leading role in a new post-Hamas Gaza, and they do intend to continue with their cooperation with Israel as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I think before we get to the idea of peace talks and, outside theater.
All right, we've got a bit of a sound problem with Benim. Can we try and get Benim?
Attacks on the U.S.
Yeah, we've lost Benim. We'll try and get Benim back up on the line. So let's continue our discussion then. I think Benim was saying there it is a bit early to start talking about a post Hamas Gaza, but my point is, the Americans didn't have a plan for after the day in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we saw what happened there. So do you think that this is something that's being talked about in Israel already?
Yes, I think so. The Americans, their problem, they didn't have a plan, or maybe didn't understand what kind of a mess they're getting into. And they've learned from that you should have an exit plan prior to entering any mess that you can't really control. In this particular case, Israel cannot withdraw its troops and go home, just like they did in Afghanistan. So obviously something has to give. And what we're talking about is, what is the end game? We can continue talking about how Hamas is destroying Gaza and they could have a haven and so on. But what do we offer with the Arabs, the moderate states, and the United States and the Europeans? What kind of future do we offer the Gazans in the day after? This is what all those leaders.
Wasn't that part of the calculation of the Netanyahu government, in that he wanted to give them work permits? He offered them to come into Israel and work. He thought that if they were getting enough money, and they were getting an awful lot of money, the Hamas leadership was getting an awful lot of money, that would affect their behavior. It didn't.
Well, the reason that I think Netanyahu did this, and a lot of people agreed with him, was to weaken the Palestinian Authority, because the real gem, so to speak, for the Israeli right is control of Judea and Samaria, of the West Bank. And Hamas was cultivated in a way by Israel so that they are actually weakening the Palestinian Authority. This history will judge whether it was a smart move. For internal Israeli politics, it certainly was, because it allowed for a moderate right-wing government to survive for a long time. But at this time, with an extreme right-wing government, it looks like it blew in our faces. So this is something that we will need to think the day after.
Let me bring in Behnam. Behnam, I think you're back with us now.
Yes.
Go ahead, Behnam.
Oh, yeah, apologies. I know there's been a little bit of talk about potential peace plans and outside mediation, but rockets are still being fired. There still continue to be multi-domain, multi-dimensional, and multi-directional attacks on U.S. forces as well as on Israel at the moment, admittedly on a still a little bit of a lower scale. So why did Iran do this? I do fundamentally believe, as you were saying earlier in the lead, that it was to impede Saudi-Israeli normalization. But it's also to impede what both the guests are talking about, which is even in the instance where Israel is able to militarily accomplish its goals via air and land in Gaza, which could be the destruction or the eradication of Hamas, the terror group that Iran supports in the Gaza Strip there, ultimately that it will still be able to fail to win the peace, because Iran's goal is to have the scenes of the destruction of Hamas impede or create space between U.S. partners and allies in the region, such that the center of attention for the region and the center of gravity is not unity between Arabs and Israel against Iran, but fracturing of Arabs and Israel, and again, a reorientation of regional ire against Israel based on the images coming out of that military campaign. So unfortunately, the Islamic Republic is moving towards achieving political aims, but through military means and violence. And for that, I think we need a better counter.
Okay, thank you, Behnam. I want to bring in Qatar. We haven't spoken about Qatar yet because, of course, a high-ranking Israeli official today praised Qatar's diplomatic efforts. And we should point out, of course, Qatar is currently hosting the Hamas leadership. Abdullah, I know your country, other countries in the region have had their problems in the past with Qatar. They imposed a blockade on Qatar. How do they see the country now and its involvement in what's happening in Gaza?
Put it this way, with all my due respect, we had our differences, but it wasn't, trivial sort of issues that, that accumulated to escalate to that level. We been at the forefront fighting fundamentalists and in all forms, but unfortunately, the Qataris and even the Israelis and the American opted to, let's say, accept the model that Qatar was representing. And as Alec have said, at the end of the day, unfortunately, what was thought to be the best tool of containment of Hamas and Palestinian Authority just came to, roost and produce a new form of monster. Netanyahu made sure that he cultivated Hamas to the maximum possible. He knew exactly what the leadership were. He helped carry the money coming from through Qatar to Hamas. Did any Israeli raise an objection to that? Did any Israeli ask, was there an Iranian money coming through those bags? Did they think that Hamas going to be building schools and factories and nurseries? Did any Israeli even stop or try to stop? It felt good. And we were telling the whole region, the whole world, you are banking or taking a very high risk by, appeasing this radicalism in the form of the Islamic Brotherhood. Look where they went. Now they are a proxy of Iran and not just by other parties.
All right, thank you, Abdallah. A policy of appeasement has led us to this.
Yes, this was trying to distance facing the problems as far ahead as possible, which is it's not containment, it's turning a blind eye. There were people who were against this, and people talking about this, but I think Netanyahu's political abilities, I would say amazing abilities, he was able to silence his critics on the left and the right who were talking about this. So we kind of all took the bait and are all paying for the results. So the question is, what will the future look like? Is it belligerency, stronger and more aggressiveness? Or is it aggressive on the one hand, but offering hope on the other hand? That part was difficult for Israel to play, and certainly for this particular government. But I think the interim defense council, that including the opposition now, will help in fostering a new thinking in the future. Not immediately, because emotions are still
we're talking about years,
ruling.
even decades. All right, Relik Shafir, thank you very much indeed. Abdullah Al-Junaid, thank you very much to you as well, and to Ben and Ben Talablu. Thank you all very much for your contributions. We appreciate it. We're going to end right now by going to central Tel Aviv. Our Batya Levintal is there. Batya.
Right, Laura, so earlier when we crossed you, we were showing you the vigil that was set up here of the teddy bears, around 30 large teddy bears, as you can see slightly behind me, with the pictures of some of the children that have been kidnapped into the Gaza Strip. And I want to move out of the frame because I want to show you just the paradox that is here at the center of Tel Aviv. We're seeing a lot of people coming here that is supposed to be vigils, Laura. People are lighting candles. These are teddy bears that have been blindfolded, covered in red paint, and the paradox is that this is a place of comfort. People are coming to sit, they're coming to pay their respects, but there's a fortune of unity in this area. There's a fortune of people wanting to just be together. Earlier when we were walking around the square, and we spoke to some people and said, you know, did you come and light a candle? Did you come and see the vigil? And they said, no, I just wanted to be with the Israeli people. And that's the very essence of what this country is about right now, coming together at the hardest of times possible.
Absolutely. Batya, thank you. Batya Levintal there, a reminder of why we are having this war right now, and that dozens of hostages are still being held in Gaza, and that is at the forefront of everyone's minds. We're going to take a short break. Stay with us.
There have been countless memorable moments broadcasting with I-24 News in the past 6 years. But for me, the one that stands out the most was the first time that I had ever personally heard a rocket siren sounding in Tel Aviv. And at that moment, we were live on air in studio. I will never forget the moment our senior producer said to me in my ear, the sirens are sounding in Tel Aviv, the control room is going to the shelter. With me in studio at the time were Michael Herzog, a former brigadier general, today the Israeli ambassador to the United States, and Arsen Ostrovsky, an international human rights lawyer, and their responses were completely different. Michael Herzog was calm and composed, and on the other hand, Arsen Ostrovsky was trying to phone his family and check in to make sure that his loved ones were okay. The camera that normally faces us was hoisted from above. There was an overhead shot of the three of us in studio. You could see colleagues going to the shelter if you looked at the glass behind the studio. And obviously, we lost contact with our team on the ground, our reporters in Ashkelon, and all the witnesses that we were speaking to during that time. When rockets are coming towards a residential area, they don't distinguish between race, religion, political views, cultural views. They just intend to harm civilians. And that moment, being in studio, hearing those interceptions overhead, was the most real coverage I have ever been involved in.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back. Hamas fired rockets at the Red Sea city of Eilat and the northern city of Haifa today. This 19 days into the war between Israel and Hamas, the Air Force has been pounding the Gaza Strip for over 2 weeks now. Let's get more with our correspondent, Hamda Salhout. She is down at the border with Gaza and she joins us now. Hamda, what's the latest where you are?
Right, Laura, so just a short while ago, Hamas firing rockets off of the Gaza Strip that we were able to see reaching far places north and places like Rishon, the alerts out there. Now, the Israeli military has been continuously bombarding the Gaza Strip, specifically here behind me in the north in Gaza City. Reports indicating that there's been heavy damage sustained in the Shaja'iyya neighborhood in the east part of the city. The Israeli military is continuing with its campaign, saying that it's going to defeat Hamas. We're still waiting for that ground invasion, though. This is the thing that everyone is watching for. Reports are indicating that that ground invasion will be delayed because the United States is hoping to replenish some weaponry across its bases all over the Middle East. So as the bombardment continues, we've seen actually a decrease in the rocket fire today, perhaps an indication that Hamas is trying to save some of their weaponry. But just yesterday, remember, there were 60 rockets fired at once towards central and northern parts of Israel. So really here, the activity is constant. The sounds of artillery are constant, and the Israeli bombardment inside of the Strip continues.
And there is some dispute over the number of casualties inside Gaza. Of course, we know that there will be innocent civilians killed in this conflict, but the former head of Reuters pointing out today that those figures cannot be trusted because, of course, Hamas is the only authority in Gaza. And on top of this, only 20 trucks of humanitarian aid have made it into the Strip so far. Is that right, Hamda?
Right. So in terms of the health ministry, while Hamas is the governing body, the health ministry is run by medical professionals who are counting the death toll. But remember, that death toll does not differentiate between civilians and combatants. Save the Children, this is a nonprofit organization, is saying that 2,000 children have been killed inside of the Gaza Strip. There are reports of continuous casualties, and because of the influx of patients in these hospitals, the medical professionals and as well as everyone else in Gaza is asking for additional aid. The international community also wants that aid to come into Gaza, but the hospitals themselves are saying that even though some of this medical equipment and this aid is coming in, it doesn't serve them any purpose without fuel. The Israeli military stance on fuel has been firm, and it has been not so discreet. They've been saying that they don't want to send in fuel because they don't want it to fall into the hands of Hamas at this time. So while some aid is coming in, Gazans are telling me it's simply not enough.
All right, Hamda, thank you very much. Hamda Salhout there, she's at the border with Gaza. With me in the studio, Brigadier General Israel Relik Shafir, former commander at the Tel Nof Air Force Base and a former combat pilot in the Israeli Air Force. Thank you for being with us. Let's talk about what might be going on in Gaza right now. We've had constant bombardment for 19 days now, so for over 2 weeks. The Hamas terrorists are buried in these tunnels deep underground. Presumably, they need fuel to keep the air in those tunnels. I mean, what will the situation be, do you think, inside northern Gaza right now?
We don't really know. When I say we, I mean here in the studio or the Israeli public.
Sure.
But let me take you back about 24 years, 1999 in Yugoslavia, when Milosevic was trying to break off and actually carried quite a few massacres for which he was vindicated later on at The Hague. The United States led a NATO coalition, 78 days of continuous bombing until they capitulated. Not a single foot soldier on the ground. That means that some air campaigns, if they're strong enough and they're directed to the right places with good enough intelligence, can actually achieve an overwhelming position of capitulation of the command posts, of communications, of energy such as fuel, electricity, air, and so on in this particular case. What really complicates things are the 220 captives there. But at this time, Israel understands that it's a kind of a do or die situation. We have to be able to bring Hamas down to a place where they are under such pressure that they will give in one way or another, cry for help and so on.
Do you think it's in Israel's interest to keep delaying the ground offensive?
Yes, as long as we have international support, as long as Hezbollah keeps on the flame, so to speak, in the north and shows that a bigger war might be coming, and as long as we have good enough results, and as long as the Israeli public does not push the government too much for emotional reasons.
To go in?
Yes. There are certainly, every day that passes, we destroy more of their capabilities. They have less energy, less communication. And so one thing, though, collateral damage or personal damage, if the numbers are kept, I wouldn't say low, but low enough not to cause
civilian casualties in Gaza you're talking about,
not to cause an international uproar, then it'll work for us. That means that we need to be careful so that we can keep on going, so that when the ground incursion, I wouldn't call it invasion, but incursion does take place at certain areas with a lot of firepower around them, we will get maximum results in minimal international opposition.
Okay, all right, thank you, Relic. Stay with us for the moment, because the full extent of the atrocities carried out by Hamas terrorists on October 7th is still being discovered here in Israel. The kibbutz of Nahal Oz is just 800 meters from the Gaza border. It was one of the first to be hit by terrorists. Before October 7th, it was home to some 400 people. Many were slaughtered on that day, others kidnapped to Gaza. The terrorists used a teenage boy, Tomer, to go house to house to try and draw out residents. He was then shot dead. Well, my next guests managed to survive the ordeal along with their 7-month-old baby girl. They were locked in a safe room. Elad and Maria Potterman are with us now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just Elad is with us. Elad, I mean, your story is beyond terrifying. Can you tell us what happened exactly?
Yeah, we were woken up by a rocket barrage and the sound of sirens. We grabbed our little daughter and ran to the safe room, where we spent some 30 minutes under this incredible rate of fire. I mean, we live in Nahal Oz, we've been through it all, we've never had anything like that before. And while that rocket barrage was going on, we heard a mortar that hit right around, I'll say, in the vicinity of the house, a few meters away. So I sent a text message to the person who's in charge of security in the kibbutz to let them know, because whenever a mortar would hit the place, you'd want to check and see that there was nobody who got injured or any dangerous explosive residue. And then we got a message from the kibbutz. It said something like, we're in a complex security situation. Enter your safe rooms, lock the door, and keep silence. So we did just that, started hearing gunfire coming closer and closer. And this place really became a war zone for the entire day. And then we started receiving fractions of information. Like I was aware by one of my friends told me that another kibbutz was invaded by terrorists, and he asked me if there are any in my kibbutz. Told them, look, I don't know, but it sounds like it's possible. We went on with that, basically in chaos in a sense, and completely unaware of bigger picture that was going on around us. At around 11 o'clock, we could hear people shouting, "Open up, IDF," but they shouted that with an Arabic accent, so we could tell that they were not truly IDF, and we kept silent. Then they broke into the house, started shouting Allahu Akbar and Itbach El Yehud, which means massacre the Jews. Started going through the house, and when they broke in, immediately what we did was basically, well, what you want to do is shout for help, but couldn't shout for help. So we text message everyone we could think of to come and help us, rescue us, but really there was nobody to come and help. The army wasn't there. So we kept quiet. They came towards the safe room door. Luckily, the previous tenant in my apartment, my house, installed a metal latch that you could close the door, lock it from within.
Goodness me.
That really ended up saving our life, as well as the fact that my little daughter was in absolute silence. She was silent
because she's
that day
7
for
months old, right?
6 hours straight.
7 months old. I mean, babies cry, they scream, they make noise. She didn't make. I mean, it's awful to think about. How you is it true you had a weapon with you? You were locked inside. You had a weapon, and you were trying to keep the baby quiet. How did you keep your nerve? How did you stay calm?
Well, I wish I could tell you that I did stay calm. I was horrified, really. But you do what you can to survive. So I think me and Maria, my wife, we were at this point we were like a team, and we communicated, kept each other focused on point. Although you are very much terrified. When they arrived to the safe room door, Maria, there was like a niche in this room. So she was standing with Lynn, holding the baby in one hand and a knife in the other. And I was holding an axe just to the right of the door, because I figured if they'll shoot through it, I'll get hit if I'm right next to the door, like right in front of the door. So I was waiting there and preparing for death, really. That's what it was. I was sure they'll break open. And then, it won't help. An axe won't save you. There were several of them, at least 3, I'm sure of that much. And, they won't come with axes. No chance, really. But they tried the door a few times, and I believe that they simply didn't know that we were there, because if they would have, then some duplication of effort would have taken place. So, Lynn was amazing, really. For 7 months old, she played quietly, she ate quietly, she was brilliant throughout the day, really. I can't explain it.
How long were you in there? How long did all of this go on?
The terrorists were in our house for about an hour, until somebody came, shouted something in Arabic, and they simply left the place. But they completely wrecked the house while they were there, and once they left, we were still locked in the safe room. So we had to wait several more hours until the real IDF actually came and cleared the house, and then several more hours until we were eventually evacuated from the kibbutz.
Goodness me. So, I mean, it's absolutely astonishing, your story. You owe your lives really to a little metal lock that was on the door that your former tenant installed. I mean,
absolutely.
Nahal Oz was a paradise, wasn't it? I mean, we know now it was an extremely vulnerable paradise. Do you think people can ever go back there? Do you think that those communities that you lived in will ever rebuild?
It's a tough question. I believe Well, it depends on how the war ends. I guess that would determine a whole lot about it. But if I have to take a guess, I think at least 50% will not return. So I don't know what that means to their communities. Yeah. That's
Okay, well, we're incredibly thankful that you're still with us, Elad. What a story, and your lovely baby daughter as well. Astonishing story. Well, we hope you get over this and you have better days. And a big kiss to the baby. What a great baby. Elad Fataman, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. There are so many stories like that where the tiny little thing could decide life or death. Let's talk about efforts to degrade Hamas's capabilities right now. We hear that the group's spokesman, I think, has been killed in an airstrike today. His house was destroyed, sorry. Looking back over the past 19 days, have their capabilities been severely harmed? I mean, how will they be operating when so many of their senior commanders have been taken out?
They're now in a survival mode, but just yesterday we saw some naval or a type of a commando trial of raid from Gaza to the Israeli Nitzanim shore. Those were killed, and the pier that they came out of was destroyed. So they still have operation capabilities. You can see the shots that they're trying to take. They were getting ready for this for quite a few years. But they're degraded in their ability because they're losing energy. Energy is fuel.
That's why fuel is such a key issue at this point. How long do you think Israel can continue to block the fuel supplies going in?
Actually, Israel has decided it will not ship fuel. And if they want to have fuel, they should have it from Egypt. Or use, for the Gazans, use Hamas's fuel reservoirs, which they do have. So we're putting a lot of pressure on their infrastructure.
Because presumably Israel could strike those fuel supplies.
Yes. That would be a tactical decision of whether we want to attack their fuel so they don't have any, but we would like for their hospitals to be operative. So it's their choice whether the fuel that they do have goes to hospitals and for some important energy for the refugees or those who have left going south, or whether they want to keep it for themselves.
Presumably they need fuel, a lot of fuel, to keep the air conditioning in those tunnels going.
Yes, that is true. And the more the Air Force is targeting those tunnels, the more of those tunnels will become unusable for different reasons, collapses and so on. So communication lines, by the way, they are using landlines so that it could eavesdrop on their...
it's easy to
listen
on their conversations.
Right. And so as we move on with this campaign, they will have less and less control, less and less energy, and we think that would make them more vulnerable. So either they, at the end of the day, try to save themselves in some kind of an agreement, or a request for ceasefire, for exchange of prisoners and so on, or we'll have to step in with ground incursion. To force them to do that, we'll have to pay, but I think the public is ready for this kind of payment because we understand that if we don't pay now, we'll pay more dearly in the future.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, let's talk about economic considerations because they are very real. This war is likely to have a detrimental impact on Israel's economy. The ratings agency Standard & Poor's has already downgraded Israel's credit outlook to negative, but aid is at hand. One organisation, Ogen, is putting together an emergency relief programme for small businesses. And Eldan Kay, the Vice President of Development and Partnerships at Ogen, am I saying that right? Ogen Jerusalem is with us now. Ogen. Okay, thank you. Tell us a bit about what you're doing, Eldan.
So, first of all, Laura, thank you for having me. It's difficult to come on after hearing these stories and some of the events, and hopefully we can create some opportunity for some positivity, or at least positive opportunities going forward. Ogen, which I have the privilege of serving, is an organization that's been around for 33 years. We're a non-profit that is focused on financial inclusion in Israel. We have been with Israel in some of the wonderful times of Aliyah, but also in some of the challenging times, like we're experiencing today. And the day after the attack, our team got together and realized that there's going to be a huge financial fallout from what we're seeing. The economy wasn't that great to start off with in the first place. The target audiences that we're reaching are often the marginalized target audiences that the mainstream banks in this country don't look at in a positive light and see them as too risky to lend to. And so Ogun prepared an emergency plan to support both families, small businesses, and nonprofits, both in terms of actual loans, a lot of them interest-free loans, by the way, as well as a hotline providing mentor advice, expert financial advice, because people are dealing with situations that they don't know how to even approach.
Well, right, of course, because a lot of workers have been deployed, called up as reservists. Shops are shut, restaurants are closed. Nobody's obviously going out anymore. You're talking about these kind of B2C businesses, these smaller businesses that in normal times are there for people, and now they're at very real risk of going bust.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about, the hair salons, the pizza shops, the small contractors, the grocery shops, the independent grocery shops, anyone that, you and I on a regular basis go to and purchase from, these are a deep risk. And we're not only talking about businesses in the south, 40 kilometers from the border, or the north. We're talking about countrywide, because as you said, this is not a matter of just being in the war zone. It's a matter of the economy and people's state of mind, and the fact that so many people have been called up to reserve duty. So it's we're looking at businesses primarily on the smaller scale of things that the banks, as I said, would not look at even from their perspective. And so we're really stepping in a place where both government, unfortunately, thus far, and mainstream banks are not providing any support, at least any meaningful support. And in the past 48 hours since we launched our outreach campaign, we have had over 2,500 applications, which just shows us that this is just the beginning, and there's a lot more demand, unfortunately, out there that we're going to be serving.
All right, so people can, small business owners who are struggling, they can look you up online as OGEN, Ogun, and they can get in touch. And you're also presumably looking for donations as well. So if anybody would like to donate, get in touch with Eldan and his team as well. All right,
so
Eldan.
Sorry, I'll just families as well, and nonprofits, so not just small businesses.
Okay, families who are struggling, small businesses and NGOs, anyone who's struggling financially as this war drags on, can get in touch with Ogun, OGEN, and they'll be able to help you out. Eldan K, thank you very much. Best of luck to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The war has had a severe impact on Israel's dairy industry as well. Many of the farmers and foreign workers were murdered or kidnapped into Gaza. And while the kibbutzim were in lockdown, nobody could tend to the cows, and many of them died. Well, 2 weeks later, dairy farmers are still reeling from events. More in this report.
It was only 4 days after the Hamas massacre in the villages near the Gaza border that the dairy farmers were allowed to return to their farms to milk their cows.
הזמן בו החל הפוגרום, שנת 2023, ברפת קיבוץ אלומי.
While terrorists were attacking his kibbutz, near Yitzhak, Shmuel the farmer was in his dairy farm.
It was Saturday. I went to feed the cows. At 6:30, I heard the siren go off. As I'm used to it, I took no notice, but continued working. I couldn't imagine what was going on near the kibbutz gate. I was almost done working and on my way home I saw the commotion. I ran home, shut myself in the safe room with my wife. We heard the terrorists around our home, and they also entered our home. It was terrifying.
Shmuel's son-in-law, Tal Chaimi, was taken by Hamas to Gaza while he was trying to protect his family. After the tragedy, Shmuel refused to leave his kibbutz. Someone had to take care of the cows.
I stayed to safeguard the farm. I can't abandon the animals. Secondly, my son is the dairy farm manager. He's a father of 2. I couldn't allow him to stay here. If someone should stay, it should be me.
The Israeli dairy farm industry relies on workers from Thailand. When Hamas terrorists entered the villages on October 7th, they murdered and kidnapped the foreigners as well. In one village, 15 people from Thailand were butchered. Now, many are planning to flee Israel. Others are prepared to stay, but not next to the border with Gaza. And few are willing to come back.
I will stay in Thailand and cope with my mental health in the meantime. I have lost 10 of my colleagues.
To save the remaining cows, people from across Israel have volunteered to keep the dairy farms working. Rachel immigrated to Israel 6 years ago. She's now a volunteer on Shmuel's farm.
Because of the war and everything, everyone left. Also take care of all the animals, the cows. So that way when they come back, they have a place home. It's still intact.
Even though the area is not secure, Rachel chose to stay.
The best way I could help is just honestly coming out here. So I was scared. There's some moments, definitely some moments during the day that, there's a azaka and we're running and don't know when to come out. But it's important to be here, to come back. It was meant to be, to come here and help out, and I'm happy to be here.
But even with the help of volunteers, the financial damage is grave.
With the volunteers, we mainly keep the farm afloat. It means feeding the cows and milking them, not more. The damage is severe because we don't take care of them properly. There are a lot of malfunctions, but we deal with that. There's no other option. It's clear to me that I will need to exchange some of the cows and rebuild the herds.
Some cows died after not being milked for 3 days, and one dairy farm in Kibbutz Kisafim was shut down after the female dairy farmer was murdered. Now, in the midst of the war, the government has decided to prolong the dairy import, which will damage the dairy farm's income even more. To save the area's milk industry, Shmuel is pleading for government help.
Now, except for the government, everyone is supporting us. The only ones who have not shown their support are the government. It's very frustrating. I want to say to them, remember us after this war ends. Help us recover this lifelong dream after the war.
And stay with us on I24 News. Prime Minister Netanyahu is to give a statement to the press within the next hour. We'll cover that live for you. Goodbye.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Was born in Manhattan, raised on Long Island, within the Jewish community.
Any type of visitation of these hostages, knowing if they're dead or alive.
The presentation behind us represents 220 families.
passe maintenant le micro.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It's day 19 of the Israel-Hamas war. Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Hamas installations and target its military leaders in the Gaza Strip, while the terror group is launching its rockets into Israel, including a new target, shooting a long-range rocket at the Red Sea resort of Eilat. Israel's death toll stands at over 1,400. The Hamas-run health ministry says that in Gaza, the number now tops 6,000. The Prime Minister of Qatar claims progress is being made in negotiations to free more of the at least 220 hostages being held in Gaza. In the north, at least 4 rockets were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel today, hitting open areas, while the IDF responded with return fire across the border. Hezbollah head Hassan Nasrallah, whose terror movement says it has suffered more than 24 casualties from Israeli fire, met in Beirut today with top figures from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad to talk of, quote, achieving victory over the Zionist entity. And while many Israelis are asking why a ground offensive into Gaza has not yet begun, a Wall Street Journal report offers one possible reason: giving time to the United States to deploy more air defense systems across the Middle East, deploying missile launchers in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf to defend American military assets there. And we expect certainly in the coming minutes or coming hour, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will make a public address. We will carry that live to you. We also have some more updated news out of Gaza. Earlier today, the Israel Defense Forces released what they said was the true photograph, picture, and name of Abu Abeidah. He is the spokesperson, propaganda chief for Hamas. He's been appearing only with his face covered in his public appearances. That is his actual appearance. The IDF saying his actual name is Khalifa Kalut. And just in the past hour, reports coming out of Gaza Strip that his family home in Gaza was bombed in an Israeli airstrike. These are unconfirmed. This is from the Hamas Interior Ministry. And several family members were killed. We have no confirmation yet on the fate of Abu Abeidah. We'll bring you any information we have as it comes through the broadcast. Well, joining me in the studio, Dr. Fadi Ismail, former senior staff for the U.S. Congress and research fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Owen Alterman, our senior diplomatic correspondent. Well, I wanted to start with this breaking news, Fadi, because the IDF, Israel saying, targeting the leaders of Hamas is definitely one of the main strategic aims here of it. And it is possible. We've had some big major figures just in the past few days. We don't know yet. Abu Abeidah certainly would be on that list.
Yes, we've seen the targeting of their homes, of their
properties of the families' homes, the immediate ring around these leaders. It seems like there is a very detailed list that the Air Force has about these people, about their close contacts and so on. And right from the beginning of this operation, beginning of this war, we've seen repetitive targeting of those specific heads of Hamas. As far as to even the West Bank, the IDF even took over the house of El Aruri himself, who is the number 2 in all of the global Hamas movement. And actually now his house is used as an Israeli HQ. Right. That's part of the... So it is very clear that the focus primarily is on these guys, and probably the right way to do it, because the message is for everybody will now stay away from them or try to retreat from being with them or around them, and that's part of the effect you want. About Hadifa El-Kahalout, he may be dead or not.
Let's go down to our correspondent Hamda Salhout. She is in the south near the Gaza border. And Hamda, reports coming out of Gaza. I know you discussed earlier Abu Abeda earlier in the day. What are you hearing? Hearing anything out of Gaza? What could possibly be happening there?
Well, look, Kalev, what I'm hearing from sources inside of the Gaza Strip is that the humanitarian situation is dire. The medical situation is also dire. There is a complete standstill in halt of some medical services because of the necessity of fuel and additional aid. Today, an aid truck arriving in Khan Yunis with a lot of medical supplies, but doctors in the hospitals are saying that without fuel, they cannot use any of the supplies that they have now been given. So the situation is continuous. The Israeli bombardment in several parts of the Gaza Strip, we've been hearing it all night. We've also seen rockets coming off the Gaza Strip heading towards more northern cities like Rishon LeZion, just south of Tel Aviv. So the situation at this time is catastrophic inside of the Gaza Strip as the Israeli military is preparing itself for that inevitable ground offensive.
Right. Of course, the IDF releasing photos that say there is fuel in Gaza being held in reserve by Hamas for its operations. What about the situation down there in the Gaza border area during the course of the day? As you said, rocket fire continues to come from inside Gaza.
Well, look, the Israeli military has evacuated a majority of the southern communities, and Israeli media was reporting that the military and Home Front Command told anyone who is still in these communities to seek shelter immediately. That was about 30-40 minutes ago. This has been declared a military zone. We haven't really seen anyone who is a resident here. It is completely empty. There is no one here but press and the army. Because of the situation, there's constantly artillery fire, constantly airstrikes, constantly things booming in the distance. You can hear that boom right now overhead, an Israeli airstrike behind me inside of the northern part of the Gaza Strip that has already sustained heavy damage in the eastern parts of Gaza City today in neighborhoods like Ashejariya. Kalev.
All right, Hamda Salhout there by the Israel-Gaza border. Let's go to the north now, the Israel-Lebanon border, because another day of fire across that border as well. And Pia, give us an update on the day there in the north.
Right, Kalev. Only in the past hours, the IDF issuing a statement saying that it has targeted 3 squads from southern Lebanon trying to launch anti-tank missiles there into Israel. We're talking about squads firing those anti-tank missiles from southern Lebanon, one of them targeting an Israeli army post in the town of Avivim, very close to the Israel-Lebanon border. That comes after this afternoon. Rocket sirens were sounding in the community of Kiryat Shmone in the area, a community that has been evacuated this week. It's a community, a major area there in the eastern part of the Israel-Lebanon border where residents have been asked to evacuate because of the constant shelling, the constant skirmishes that we've been seeing in the past 2 weeks between Israel and Hezbollah. That coming also as this afternoon Haifa was targeted by a missile, a rocket coming not from Lebanon but from Hamas. In fact, Hamas firing a long-range missile from the Gaza Strip into the area of Haifa. That missile exploded, that rocket exploded in the air. No casualties, no injuries there. But that really shows you how Hezbollah and Hamas are trying to combine the fronts. This morning, a meeting happening, Hezbollah publishing about it between Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and the leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Ziad al-Nakhle, and one of the most senior Hamas officials, Saleh al-Arouri, really them saying and stating that their goal is to now continue to support the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and to really talk about the next steps being taken in that, what they said, sensitive moment in that war. So that really shows you, and this is also what Hezbollah has been emphasizing throughout the year, that the fronts are combined. Also now seeing that yesterday 2 rockets were launched from Syria. Israel has been targeting Syrian targets throughout the night. Now, a couple of hours ago, also the airport in Aleppo was struck in what is attributed to Israel in an airstrike for the 4th time already in this war. As we know that Israel is set to target Iranian targets in Syria. They're preventing Iran from delivering weapons to its proxies in Syria.
All right, Pia Steckelbach there by the Israel's northern border. Thank you for that. We just have a announcement from the IDF that the Israel Defense Forces spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, will be giving a statement to the media at 8:45 at the IDF headquarters. Significance there, Owen, is that he usually has been announced as giving a statement at 8:15, which would be about 4 minutes from now, indicating that perhaps they've pushed that back to allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to make an address. Of course, the Prime Minister often runs a little late there.
He's known to do that.
We should say there is a meeting of the cabinet this evening, suggesting maybe some decisions will be made. Reports throughout the day of perhaps, the Qatari Prime Minister, will have more on that later, saying there's progress towards a hostage deal. Speculation because of reports and Hamda related to it, advising residents of the Gaza border area, those who remain, that they should prepare themselves to spend an extended period in their protected shelter. So a lot of speculation about perhaps some announcement of note coming perhaps this evening or development.
Right. Netanyahu's not spoken to the country every night, Kalev, so the fact he decided to speak would lead us to believe that he has something to say. In terms of the rumors, and there are a lot of rumors swirling around about exactly what happened an hour ago, an hour and a half ago in Gaza City. But I think 2 things to keep our attention on. One is the issue of senior Hamas officials, and you and Fadi spoke about that before. The other issue is the tunnels. Again, just to drive this home for our viewers, to end Hamas control of the Gaza Strip, which is what Israel wants to do, the bottom line is that the tunnel network has to be attacked and destroyed. That's where Hamas's assets are. That's where Hamas goes to hide and reorganize and have a safe harbor, so to speak. And if Israel's going to win the war, Hamas's center of gravity is there in that tunnel network. And it may be, some of the reports coming out are not as much about the senior officials, though that may be true as well, but about big parts of the tunnel network having been destroyed. And as for that in the ground offensive, I just want to take us all back to a conversation we had in the studio with one of our guests about a week and a half ago that made a great impression on me. He was a pilot, one of the few pilots that attacked the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, so senior airpac. Relic, exactly, and a senior airpac pilot. And we talked in studio, again, about how to destroy the tunnels. Because, again, if Israel's going to win the war, then the tunnels need to be destroyed. So it begs the question of how you do that. And what came out of the discussion is this. First of all, that the tunnels are very far underground, but there are the openings to the ground, to get above ground, which is where the earth is weaker. And so the process is that Israeli intelligence needs to identify where those openings are. And then, as Relic described, the Air Force bombs that opening, bombs again, bombs again, bombs again, and again, or uses strong munitions until the tunnel simply opens up. And if that's the case, if he's right about his theory, then the ground campaign isn't the central element of the war. Because the central element of the war is destroying the tunnels, and that's done from the air. Not to say a ground campaign isn't necessary to take control of the Gaza Strip, it obviously is. But taking his theory or his contention to its conclusion, the center of attention is the airstrike. And so it may be that we're seeing evidence of that theory tonight. Again, I'm interested in hearing more from more experts about this from the military side and security side, but I think it's an important thing for us to keep our attention on.
Well, maybe the briefing by the IDF spokesperson will have more information on that. But I do want to relate to this Wall Street Journal report, Fadi, today saying that one of the reasons a ground operation may have been delayed is that the U.S. wanted to deploy air defense systems, advanced air defense systems in various countries in the region where it itself has assets, perhaps concerned over that those assets, the military bases or forces in places like Iraq and Syria and in the Gulf, could come under fire. We're seeing the podium of the Prime Minister, by the way. That's what you're looking at there. That those assets could come under attack either by proxies from Iran, such as the Houthis, or Shiite militias in Iraq or Syria, or in worst-case scenario, let's say, for, regionally, Iran itself.
Yes, this is not a war between Israel and Hamas. Not anymore. It hasn't been, actually, for 2 weeks. You have a whole, I can't say an alliance, but there's a whole movement. I put it in very simple words, like the writer Ayn Rand would say, Atlas Shrugged. This is what happens now. The whole world is moving. We have special forces arriving very close to here from Germany, from Holland, from places like that, that are all, the whole world is coming closer here. The American forces are not full yet. We still have other entities that should arrive in the region. Not everybody is well deployed. Not everybody is ready. And the air defenses are part of this. There's intelligence operations have to be completed. There's information that needs to be collected. There's planning that has to be done. And also, there is no point in running now into Gaza from the Israeli.
The Prime Minister.
We are in the midst of a war over our existence. We set two goals for this war: to wipe out Hamas by eradicating both its military and governmental capabilities, and to do anything and everything possible in order to bring our hostages back home. All Hamas activists must die above the ground, beneath the ground, inside Gaza, and outside of Gaza. Together with Minister of Defense Gallant, the Minister Benny Gantz, the Security Cabinet, Chief of General Staff, and the heads of the security forces, we are working around the clock in order to carry out and execute the goals of our war until victory. And we do so without any political considerations. The only thing we care about is saving this country and obtaining victory. We are bringing down lethal fire on Hamas. We've already killed off thousands of terrorists, and this is just the beginning. And we're also preparing for the ground offensive. I'm not going to give any specifics on when, how, and how much. I'm also not going to specify the various considerations we're taking into account. Many of these considerations are not known to the general population in Israel, and that's a good thing, because we want to protect our soldiers' lives. I would like to be clear. The timing of the IDF operation was determined unanimously by the cabinet in charge of this war. Together with the Chief of General Staff and together with the cabinet, we operate in order to guarantee the most optimal conditions for our troops for the upcoming activities. And when we get into Gaza, and then later on, we're going to get those murderers who committed these horrific events of Hamas ISIS to pay the full price. Once again, I call upon those who are uninvolved in Gaza. Leave and go to the south of the Gaza Strip. Leave your homes. Citizens of Israel, even amid wartime, we do not forget for one moment the terrible pain of the loss of over 1,400 of our brothers and sisters who were cold-bloodedly massacred and who were killed in heroic battles against these terrible monsters who wanted to kill us all. The loss of their lives are like arrows pointed at our heart. Our soul, the soul of this nation, is bleeding. We will determine national days of grieving for those who were killed. Elijah, one of the troops, was killed in the war, and his mother, Nava Lisha, grieved for him, eulogized when he was buried, and said, "From the pains of this war, we will be reborn as a nation." And I think nobody could say it more aptly. I bow my head as I face all these families who are now facing such a terrible tragedy. I know that their lives will never be the same again. And I would like to send to them, to convey to them from the bottom of all Israelis a big and loving embrace. The ministers of the government are doing everything they can in order to reach out and help those who need help. We have evacuated thousands of citizens who are in the confrontation lines to hotels and other arrangements, and that's fully funded by the state. And we are now formulating plans to provide additional assistance to all citizens of Israel, just as we did during COVID. We won't leave anyone behind, and the Minister of Finance will elaborate on that as soon as possible. We will rebuild and rehabilitate the kibbutzim and all the communities that have been so severely harmed. We've established 600 ready squads with new shipments of weapons coming from overseas, and we will add additional forces to this effort. We are encouraging citizens to start using weapons, but we're doing so in a controlled manner. We are rallying the support of world leaders to support our campaign, to continue with this campaign. Many of them understand today what we've been saying to them since 2014. Hamas is ISIS. And ISIS is Hamas. And I say to them that our war against Hamas is their war as well. Our war against Hamas is a test for all of humanity. It is a struggle between the axis of evil of Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, and the axis of freedom and progress. We are the people of the light. They are the people of darkness, and light shall triumph over darkness. Citizens of Israel, October 7th was a very dark and black day in our history. We will fully investigate what had happened at our southern border, the border with Gaza. Everybody will have to provide answers, myself included, but all that will happen only after the war. As a prime minister, I'm responsible for guaranteeing the future of this country, and now my role is to lead all Israelis, the state of Israel and the people of Israel, to an overpowering victory. It is now a time to come together for one purpose, to storm ahead to achieve victory. With joint forces and a profound belief in our justness, a profound belief in the eternity of the Jewish people, we shall realize the prophecy of Isaiah. There will no longer be stealing at your borders, and your gates will be of glory. Together we will fight. Together we will win.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking. I would say there was not new information in that speech. It was a speech mainly to address some of the criticism, it would seem, that has been addressed primarily to the government and to the anxiety within Israel over the timing, perhaps, of a ground operation. Owen Alterman, your impressions?
Yeah, along the lines of what you were saying, there aren't any real headlines here or any major pieces of news. I think you're right. This was mainly to address criticism of the government's functioning, not necessarily so much on the military front, but on the civilian side. Again, concerns about the economic plan in order to help people who have been affected, and huge swaths of the society have been affected. And Netanyahu also addressing, I suspect not to the satisfaction of many in the Israeli public, this issue of his not coming out and taking responsibility for what happened on October 7th, saying that there will be time for questions after the war. Right now, my responsibility is to guarantee the future of the Jewish states. Obviously, that'll be up to the Israeli public to decide, and obviously there will be a feisty argument about that. We did have the Prime Minister come out and commit Israel to a ground offensive, which is a minor headline.
Right, but I think it was his first very specific reference.
Right, because again, there are those Kalev among Israel's allies who reportedly are trying to dissuade persuade Israel. We had Emmanuel Macron come out and say, just in the last few hours, it would be a mistake for Israel to go in a massive way in a ground invasion. To parse what Netanyahu say, I don't know that he necessarily used the word massive, and he can still check that box of a ground invasion through something lesser, but he at least indicated that as of now, that is a big part of Israel's plan. I think stepping back, there is a sense of kind of stasis here in Israel, right? A kind of settling into a kind of depressing new routine with this war that it doesn't necessarily seem to be moving backward, but the goals in the eyes of the Israeli public don't seem to be moving forward at any real speed, either in the military or in a sense on the civilian front. So I guess Netanyahu wanted to be out there and to be seen giving this update. And just as a final note on that, I think one of the reasons he felt he needed to do this is so unfamiliar in the Israeli psyche. I can't remember in my lifetime at least, Kalev, an Israeli military operation that moved with such, let's say, deliberation, right? Where there was such a long pause and such a long period of trying to understand what the right course of action is. Generally, that's not been Israel's national security doctrine. Israel's national security doctrine has been to take the initiative, to show strength, quickly and decisively, and to make an impression on the other side and to have that side therefore be deterred. We see a different dynamic, here, I should say, maybe for the better. Again, that remains to be seen. Again, Israel, in this sense, taking counsel from its allies who may have a different approach to these type of issues, and obviously we'll see where it leads.
All right. I do want to say he did try to maybe make that point of the air campaign having that kind of impact. Maybe we'll get more details when Rear Admiral Hagari
also
speaks. True. We have reports that the IDF is now striking in Lebanon. As we said, there was cross-border fire today. Fadi, I want to get also your reaction. Also, interesting that the Prime Minister did mention there are factors that are dictating the timing of a ground operation, which he did specify would happen, that are unknown to the public, and maybe it's better not known for the public. We just talked about perhaps one of them, a deployment of more U.S. air defense systems across the region here, in a sense, telling the public, you may not know it's coming, you won't know when, but things are moving, even though you may not be aware of it.
Yeah, I promise you, there is Israeli activity inside Gaza in the form of special operations, recon, collecting information, collecting data. They go in, they come out. I mean, we do have people going in and out. It is basically preparing making all the possible preparations. Right. You know, like somebody taught me in officer school, taught us, the class, war plans are wonderful until they meet reality.
Right.
So you can plan all you want, but that's a thing. It's a process of thinking, getting out of the shock that existed. The whole system was in shock. I mean, let's call it what it is. We cannot count them 2 weeks like they are equal. The days were different. The first few days were a place where you go back finding your footing again.
Right.
So the system has its footing now. Now it's playing scenarios, seeing what's happening. Other countries also have to get the ducks in a row.
Right.
We're not alone here. You have to understand. We have China in the picture. We have Russia in the picture. We have, I mean, the whole world is reorganizing itself around this situation. And if we are saying this is going to be very long, months, maybe a year, then yeah, it's going to be something of a routine. You know, I mean, something like that. It's becoming a marathon. It is not a sprint, a 10-second sprint.
I understand, but of course there are consequences of that, economic consequences, social consequences for Israel. There is a question of how much that can be sustained. Gentlemen, I want to move now to the diplomatic sphere, because across the political spectrum, Israeli leaders here continue to condemn the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Opposition leader Yair Lapid, for example, saying that his comments at a Security Council session Tuesday had, quote, brought shame upon the UN. Now, Guterres' comments since that Tuesday session have so far done nothing to temper the storm. Our senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman examines what Guterres says and why it's kicking up such a fuss.
Even for Israel at the United Nations, it's a new low, with continued anger in Israel Wednesday over the comments of Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York a day earlier.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation.
Mr. Secretary General, in what world do you live? Definitely, this is not our world. Saturday, October 7, will go down in history as nothing less than a brutal massacre.
Families of Israeli hostages went ahead Tuesday with their meeting with Guterres, but Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen canceled his meeting. Israel began denying visas to UN officials. Ambassador to the UN Gilad Erdan called for Guterres to resign. And the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Wednesday had this to say.
Those who seek to understand look for a justifying context, do not categorically condemn the perpetrators, and do not call for the unconditional and immediate release of the abducted, fail the test. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres failed the test.
Guterres took to the podium Wednesday to explain. Israel remained unimpressed.
I am shocked by the misrepresentations by some of my statement yesterday in the Security Council, as if I was justifying acts of terror by Hamas. This is false. It was the opposite.
Israel and UN institutions have had tense relations for decades, with Israel feeling UN bodies and UN officials do not give Israel's claims a fair hearing, that the United Nations has a deep-rooted anti-Israel culture. That has not always tainted the Secretary General himself, which is why the fury over Guterres' comments is news. And the storm comes at a sensitive time, with UN agencies a key force in the Gaza Strip, making this a high-stakes diplomatic fight for all involved.
Well, let's go now to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in New York, there at the UN. Mike, the Secretary General is shocked that his statement kicked up such a fuss, maybe indicating a bit of a bubble there at the UN.
No doubt whatsoever there. It's almost like you're living in two different realities here, which is not uncommon at the United Nations whatsoever. But Guterres refusing to back down, essentially doubling down on his statements today. Meanwhile, there are certainly diplomatic ramifications beyond tweets in this particular issue, given that Israel's in the midst of a conflict in which the UN is heavily involved. Guterres' spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, gave a press briefing a little while ago, speaking to I-24 and other reporters in the room. He said that essentially that work continues between the UN and Israeli officials at the lower levels, essentially on the ground there in Jerusalem. They said they're continuing to work well through the challenges, despite the rhetoric that's going back and forth right now. He said Martin Griffiths, the UN humanitarian coordinator, who had his visa essentially denied by Israeli Ambassador Gilad Erdan. Griffiths is currently waiting in Geneva, doing other work on other humanitarian crises throughout the world, and is essentially awaiting further instructions here as to how to go about handling the Israeli-Gaza conflict in his current role. Otherwise, I asked Dujarric, it seems that there has been a bubbling of tension between Israel and the United Nations for quite some time. Keep in mind, even before Guterres' comments yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has yet to pick up the phone when Guterres has called since the outbreak of Hamas's massacre of Israelis and the subsequent a military conflict. There was also a war of words between Erdan and Guterres on another matter earlier on this summer in a counterterrorism operation in Jenin. He said, listen, when there are UN representatives and UN agencies working in conflict areas throughout the world, there's bound to be tensions between member states and the UN. Previously, they've been able to work through it. Obviously, now it's a little bit different. Meanwhile, other countries around the world getting involved in this particular conflict. We spoke yesterday with the Hungarian foreign minister to get his views. Obviously, Hungary and Israel have quite close ties, and we asked him his reaction to Guterres' comments and how Hungary may be able to play a productive role along with like-minded countries. Here's Hungary's foreign minister speaking with I-24 News yesterday.
I think in such a situation, everybody has to speak clearly and in a way that cannot be misunderstood or misinterpreted. We have to say very clearly that Israel has been under attack. Israel has been under a heinous and brutal terrorist attack. And Israel does have the right to protect itself, and Israel does have the right to make sure that such kind of a terrorist attack will never ever take place again. This is not the interest of Israel exclusively. This is also the interest of the whole international community. Because in case such terrorist attacks happen, those put a serious risk on the entire global security as well. So Israel does have the right to protect itself, and Israel does have to get the support of the international community to do so. In the meantime, I have to tell you that there's another very important duty of the international community to make it sure that this fight against terror will not turn into a war between countries. Because if a war between countries launches in the Middle East region, that has an absolutely unpredictable conclusion, if it does have at all. And under the current global security situation, including the growing threat of terror in Africa, including the war in Ukraine, and unfortunately including the latest developments in the Middle East, if these are all added together, then we come very close to something which we might call a third world war, and this definitely must be avoided.
Well, definitely a different framing of the situation than we heard from the Secretary General there, Mike. But let's look at the UN now. Resolutions coming, and there's going to be seems like it'll be an ongoing conflict there in the Security Council, coming to some kind, if any kind of resolution.
That's right. There'll be dueling resolutions offered up later on this afternoon, one by the United States, the other by its rival, the Russian Federation. The U.S. Draft resolution has been negotiated now over several days, was supposed to be brought to a vote yesterday, but pushed back now till today. It calls for a humanitarian pause. It calls for the safe passage of Gazan civilians if they need to move and evacuate throughout Gaza. Several other clauses in that resolution negotiated on. Russia said it's essentially useless resolution, which indicates they will use their veto power against it later today. Russia then will offer up its own resolution, which goes a little bit broader and harder, calling for a humanitarian ceasefire, not a pause, a ceasefire. It also essentially orders the rescission, the revocation of Israel's evacuation order for Gazans living in the northern part of the enclave. Russia offered up a resolution last week in the Security Council. It did not garner the requisite votes. It's quite unclear if it will do so this time, but even so, I would imagine with a ceasefire not being approved by the United States, the U.S., if necessary, will use its veto power once again here, as it did on a Brazilian resolution last week.
Yeah, I think it's pretty assured the U.S. would veto that if it came to any kind of vote, which perhaps won't even get that far. Mike Wackenheim at UN headquarters in New York, thank you for that. I want to move now from the diplomatic sphere to the more personal, intimate sphere, because that's really what's important here, what those people went through on October 7th. And along with the many tragic stories that have emerged from the Hamas terror attack, have also been remarkable tales of heroism and survival. One of them concerns a 9-day-old baby whose very brief life was almost brought to an end that day, but was saved thanks to the determination and wits of his parents. Here's that story adapted from a report by Channel 12 News.
9 days before this picture was taken, Kai was in a safe place, still in the womb. In this picture, he is lying without any protection on the windowsill of the protected room. The house on the right in this video is that of Uriel, Amy, and little Kai. When Hamas terrorists stormed Kibbutz Nirim on October the 7th, Amy's mother was with the family as well.
My mother grabbed Kai, the baby. He started crying. She just put a finger in his mouth so that he would be as quiet as possible. Uriel and I, together, just held the handle of the door in a locked position as much as we could. They just fought with us to try to open it. And when they couldn't get in at all, that's the stage. They just decided to drag things behind the door and set it on fire.
The terrorists, unable to open the door of the protected room, set the whole house alight in an attempt to smoke out the occupants. The protected room began to boil.
We just started seeing the orange of the flames and feeling the heat. And all I remember is Uriel simply saying, they are burning the house. Smoke thick and black.
It managed to get into the protected room. We had some water. We tried to dampen our clothes and put water on our faces, on the baby's face, so that he would inhale as little smoke as possible.
6 hours after the fire broke out, the room is black. Whenever there is silence and no shooting, they lay Kai on the windowsill.
It was one of the hardest decisions we had to make. On the one hand, if you leave him inside the room, he will probably inhale a lethal amount of smoke, and that can be horrible. And on the other hand, if I put him on the windowsill, the terrorists are still walking around. We're still hearing explosions. There is still a code red and missiles falling. The worst thoughts came up. We look into each other's eyes. They say, I love you. When you hold him in your hands and he foams at the mouth and he cries, and he already has soot in his eyes and nose, and the whole room is black, and everyone is in this situation for hours making difficult decisions. And at that moment, it looks like the right thing to do is to put him on the windowsill, to at least let him breathe.
From time to time, Amy nurses Kai. From time to time, she reaches out and takes a picture until the rescue comes.
Get out, help us out. Mom, we'll help you out.
Get out, get out, get out.
Wait, my mother first.
That's the moment we cried. All the emotions we tried to keep inside so we could function. At that moment, I was crying like I haven't cried since I was 6. Let them just take the baby and save him first. That they rescue us. That they move us to a safe place. That this nightmare will end.
Now the entire Kibbutz Nirim community is staying in a hotel in Eilat.
What's in this room right now is all the possessions we have, because it's all burned. Over there is baby equipment. It's all donations or gifts from friends. All I wear are clothes that are donated. The crib is a donation. Actually, this room is our home.
Amy still has a bad cough. Uriel has an eye injury. And Kai? He is perfectly fine.
The meaning of his name is knowing how to fall and get up. His name means warrior. It means victory. It has a lot of meanings. Meanwhile, he's greatly honoring his name.
Incredible parents, and may baby Kai have a long, healthy, and happy life ahead of him. Joining us in the studio, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran. Ariel, a lot of rumors, reports coming out of Gaza this evening. What do we know about certainly the military activity and some of the perhaps significant strikes against Hamas leadership there?
So there's not a lot that we can say, but there is significant activity concentrated in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, mainly Beit Lahia and that area. It includes not only activity from the air or artillery. That is what we can say, but it is significant military activity going on currently in the northern part of Gaza.
All right. Now, you've just come, you were in the south today. You were at the kibbutz Be'eri site of that horrible massacre. More than 100 people killed there, dozens more kidnapped. Just give us, surely you'll be doing a more fuller report on this, but give us a sense there. Reports that 4 more bodies, just more than 2 weeks after the attack, were discovered or in
the vicinity of Be'eri. Yeah, the bodies of 4 more Israelis were discovered by Israeli emergency services in the vicinity of kibbutz Be'eri, adding 4 more dead to the toll of 130 members of the kibbutz who have been killed. Now, the number of kidnapped is still unknown because there are about 50 unidentified members of the kibbutz that they don't know what happened to them.
Right.
They're considered missing persons at the moment.
This is not among the 220 confirmed hostages that the IDF has said.
Not part of the confirmed hostages and not part of the confirmed deceased.
Right.
There are still
numerous bodies that have not yet been identified due to the severity of their condition. And that is pretty much what you see in Be'eri. It's a war zone in an urban, in a kibbutz, which is one of the most pleasant kibbutzes. It's the biggest kibbutz in the area, over 1,200 people on the eve of October 7th. And 19 days after, you can still smell the smell of burning bodies, even though the fires are put out. It's the best way it can be described is it looks as if it was swallowed by hell,
right,
for a few hours and spat out, and now we're starting to pick up the pieces. That is the situation in Be'eri. We met some very brave, courageous locals who are there also explaining the situation to foreign journalists because it's a closed military zone. But I will note that already the day after, or 2 days after the attacks, the printing factory in the kibbutz, which is the biggest in Israel and claims to be the biggest in the Middle East, that is operating in full steam. The residents of Be'eri are currently in a hotel in the Dead Sea. They make the trip day in and day out to keep the printing factory open, also for the kibbutz, also for themselves to be active in some way or another, just to help move forward. But I think it's a sign of optimism, of hope, and of courage for the people, not only of the Western Negev, Southern Israel, but for all the people of Israel. These brave people of Be'eri are starting to bring life back.
Well, I was glad to hear that.
Story of resilience.
Story of resilience. A community that's been resilient, of course, over the decades, given what it's had to do with in Gaza. I want to move now. More and more regional leaders have been weighing in here in the Middle East on the Israel-Hamas war. One of them is the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who in recent years has steered his country toward a renewal of relations with Israel, foregoing the harsh criticism that he regularly used during the years of a diplomatic freeze between Ankara and Jerusalem. But today, speaking to the Turkish parliament, you could say the old Erdogan was back, defending Hamas and slamming Israel. Let's take a listen.
Hamas is not a terrorist organization, but a group of liberators and mujahideen fighting to protect their land and their citizens. Dear brothers and sisters, of course we had good intentions, but they abused them. We had a project to go to Israel, but it was cancelled. We will not go.
All right, the Foreign Ministry spokesman Lior Hayat writing, putting out a message. Israel wholeheartedly rejects the Turkish president's harsh words about the terrorist organization Hamas. And Fadi, this is Erdogan back to a form that Israel has not seen him for a number of years. And one has to wonder how much of this is rhetoric and how much this may be a backsliding back toward that point where basically there was a diplomatic freeze or cutoff between Israel and Turkey.
I think he identified an opening in the diplomatic opening, because if you look at how the Islamic world and the Arab world is responding to, that's an interesting question. How did that world react to? And we see different views, different approaches to that. But especially...
hold on. The IDF spokesman has started speaking. Let's take a listen. Daniel Hagari.
Good evening. This is the 19th day of the war. We are continuing to strike at Gaza. Today we attacked terrorism infrastructure inside buildings, beneath the ground. We're going to continue and attack in Gaza in order to obtain the goals of our war. Every such assault is improving our situation as we approach the next stages of this war. The IDF forces are extensively deployed around the Gaza Strip, prepared both on the offensive and the defensive, and gearing for the next stages of the war. At the north border, we managed to kill off several terrorist cells. Wherever we see a terrorist cell on its way to fire towards Israel, towards an IDF unit, we kill them off. It happens every day, and it's going to continue like that. Anybody who sends terrorist cells against us will pay a heavy price for that. As for the home front in the Gaza border region, we haven't changed our defensive instructions. You need to stay near a shelter in a safe room. We keep updating the instructions every day. We must continue to comply and must not be complacent. There will be rockets launched at different places in Israel. So adhering to these instructions will enable us to carry on with our routine in the shadow of the war. And this is very important for both the Israeli population and for us. I'd like to give an update on the situation of fatalities and hostages. So far, 309 IDF fallen soldiers' families have received note, and over 200 hostages. We're going to continue and support the bereft families constantly. Our heart is always with you. The national effort to bring back the hostages is a top priority, and we're going to continue and do whatever it takes, whether it's a civilian effort, an operative effort, an intel effort. For us, it's a top priority, and whatever piece of information we will receive, we will update the families about it. This war is going to be a long one. And in order to achieve the goals of this war, we need resilience, we need trust, we need patience. We are going to keep updating you here on our progress in order to obtain the goals of this war, which is completely wiping out Hamas, leadership, infrastructure, terrorism, and bringing back the hostages home as a top priority. Now, I will answer questions. Brigadier General Hagari, we saw about how the underground sphere was attacked and the collapse of roads. Can you tell us, was this an attempt to a targeted killing that maybe succeeded or failed? I will comment on our assaults in Gaza. We are striking around the clock. Any intel information we receive about an operational apartment or any other underground infrastructure, we target it. We've said this, we continue to say this to the people living in Gaza City or around it. We keep telling them, move south. We've established the conditions there. There is a very big humanitarian effort there with the U.S. and Egypt, and we've provided them with food and meds and water. We're going to keep attacking in order to achieve our goals and also in order to improve our conditions towards the next phase of the war.
Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari was asked a question about some of these, probably stemming from some of these reports of potentially senior Hamas figures being targeted or killed in IDF airstrikes. He did not respond with any specifics. He did discuss, of course, the hostages, putting the focus squarely on that issue, as it should be. And there is a very interesting, moving tribute to them, especially the young children who have been taken into Gaza at Tel Aviv's Dizengoff Square. Our Batya Leventhal is there. Tell us about that really, I would say, emotional display there, Batya.
Hit the nail on the head there, Kalev. It is just purely an emotional display and a very hard one to look at, but very real because it explains exactly the situation on the ground. So I'm going to move out of the way exactly so that you can see, but there are 30 large teddy bears that have been placed here at Dizengoff Square, the heart of Tel Aviv. And the teddy bears are blindfolded. They have also been splattered with red paint to indicate blood. And they have the pictures of the individual children, their names and their ages that have been kidnapped by Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. A fortune of people have been coming past today, including foreign international media agencies as well, to come and have a look at this vigil. The vigil is also accompanied by the lights that are lit all over the square. Again, apart from those who are being kidnapped, there are those who are still missing and those that have been murdered at the hands of Hamas. And so the square really turning into quite the paradox, Kalev, because it's very emotional, very difficult to be here and to see this. But at the same time, people keep telling me that they come here because it provides them a sense of unity, a sense of calm, to be with people, to be together. And so you can really see this is very much at the fore of not only the Israeli conscience, but is also trying to make sure that it stays at the very fore of the world's conscience, that we still have children, toddlers, that are in the Gaza Strip under conditions that we don't fully know. And they need to be brought home, and they need to be brought home now. And what's been even more heartbreaking, actually, to see, Kalev, Earlier, when we were live on TV, we were also having a look at some of the parents that are bringing their children here and having to explain to their children exactly what this is. And more so than that, we saw a young child, could not have been older than 8 or 9 years old, go and hug one of the teddy bears. This is the reality in Israel at the moment, but it's a reality that people are coming together for, are making sure that the world knows. And it's one that we've seen the foreign media coming to report on as well. And it's very difficult to see how they can possibly look at these teddy bears, look at how they're being placed, and say anything but what the reality is with regards to these 30 children on the ground in Gaza.
All right, thank you for that, Bachi Leventhal. We're going to go with the White House. President Biden making some remarks relating to Israel.
And President Sisi of Egypt for working with the United States to make sure that food, water, and medical supplies are getting through to innocent people in Gaza. The flow needs to increase, and we're working very hard with our partners to make that happen. We're also working around the clock together with our partners in the region to secure the release of hostages, and including American citizens left behind and held by Hamas, and the safe passage of foreign nationals out of Gaza, not just Americans, but Australians and a whole range of people who are trapped in Gaza. I also want to take a moment to look ahead toward the future that we seek. Israelis and Palestinians equally deserve to live side by side in safety, dignity, and peace. There's no going back to the status quo as it stood on October the 6th. That means ensuring Hamas can no longer terrorize Israel and use Palestinian civilians as human shields. It also means that when this crisis is over, there has to be a vision of what comes next. And in our view, it has to be a two-state solution. It means a concentrated effort from all the parties, Israelis, Palestinians, regional partners, global leaders, to put us on a path toward peace. In the past few weeks, I've spoken to leaders throughout the region, including King Abdullah of Jordan, President Sisi of Egypt, President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, and just yesterday with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, about making sure there's real hope in the region for a better future, about the need, and I mean this sincerely, about the need to work toward a greater integration for Israel, while insisting that the aspirations of the Palestinian people will be part of that future as well. I'm convinced one of the reasons Hamas attacked when they did, and I have no proof of this, just my instinct tells me, is because of the progress we were making towards regional integration for Israel and regional integration overall. And we can't leave that work behind. And one more word on this. I continue to be alarmed about extremist settlers attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. That pouring gasoline on fire is what it's like. This was a deal. The deal was made, and they're attacking Palestinians in places that they're entitled to be. And it has to stop. They have to be held accountable, and it has to stop now. Mr. Prime Minister, I want to thank you for your partnership and your friendship, quite frankly, during this difficult hour. Over the past few weeks and for many months before, we've seen each other, and we've seen our alliance grow more critical than ever. And we need to continue to make this important progress. In our discussions today, we've done just that. First, we're pioneering new advancements and innovations, deepening our cooperation in fields like biotechnology, advanced batteries, quantum computing, cybersecurity, and a lot more. We're also signing a new technology safeguards agreement to create more opportunities for American space companies to launch vehicles from
U.S. President Joe Biden speaking at the White House, addressing the situation here in Israel, not just Israel, in the Middle East. And he had many interesting points there, really going to some details, more than we heard, for example, from Prime Minister Netanyahu, understandably. But your takeaways, because there was some interesting ones there, Owen.
An important speech with a lot of messages to the Israeli government, Kalev, an emphasis on the two-state solution and on the day after the war.
The day after the war.
Much more, and what we heard from the president there about the day after the war than the war itself. We should say, and be very clear, not backing off of what he said about support for Israel
and about
in the war.
Hamas.
And about eliminating Hamas, about the importance of the hostages, and about all the rest. And of course, about the importance of humanitarian aid, which we've heard from the administration over the course of the war. But a big emphasis on the day after, on the saying that the status quo of October 6th is not something that will be able to be returned to, both in the sense of Hamas's strength, but also in the sense of the political status of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, saying there needs to be a new push to resolve it. And in their view, in his view, the two-state solution should be what would be pursued. Obviously, that will not necessarily be music to the ears of many in the current Israeli government. Also talked about the need to continue with the push for normalization, saying that he doesn't have hard information that Hamas picked this time in order to disrupt the normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but indicating that he felt that that was a reasonable theory and saying it's important to return to that. And also pointedly talking about violence by Israeli settlers in the West Bank.
That was very noticeable.
To the best of my recollection, this is the first we've heard from the president on this issue since the start of the war. There has obviously been plenty of reports, including video footage, of settler attacks that are continued or increased over the course of the war. It's been a bit of a sideshow in the big picture of all that's been happening, right? Whether it be in the Gaza Strip, the concern about the Lebanese border and the wider region, but it's certainly been part, and the president putting a big emphasis on that and saying that there needs to be accountability for people who are doing this. So again, not backing, on the one hand, not backing away from his strong support for Israel on the visit here and on the days beforehand, but certainly laying down some new markers for Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that he will have to either respond to now or respond to at some point in the future. But Joe Biden may be, in some sense, Cleve, in terms of domestic American politics, trying to draw some balance between his strong support for Israel and laying out support for the Palestinians and for a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
All right. I just adding on to this, because there was this address follows a phone call yesterday between President Biden and Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, in which they talked about continuing the peace process and even indicating continuing the normalization process with Israel once this has ended.
Well, in his speech, President Biden said that he believes that this was aimed, the attacks of October 7th and what has happened since are aimed at trying to derail the normalization process between Israel and the Arab world, mainly Saudi Arabia. And onto that note, in order to prevent that from happening, that's why the U.S. president is sending his envoy to the Middle East, Barbara Leaf. She's heading to the UAE, Qatar, Oman, Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. That's not a random group of countries, especially Oman there, which is seen as a kind of a mediator. Oman and Qatar are seen as mediators between the two camps. And so the Biden administration and President Biden himself, since October 7th, continues to consistently show how engaged they are in what's going on, also diplomatically, also militarily, and that they are cooperating closely with Israel.
Well, and staying focused on the Gulf for a second, you mentioned, for example, some of those countries. The Gulf state of Qatar continues, of course, to be deeply involved in negotiations aiming to free more of the hostages held in Gaza. Its Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, saying at a press conference in Doha today that, quote, there is some progress and some breakthrough, and there is some progress, and we remain hopeful for a breakthrough. Also today, there were rare words of public praise about Qatar from a top Israeli official, the National Security Advisor Tzachi Hanegbi, who tweeted, quote, I'm pleased to say that Qatar is becoming an essential party and stakeholder in the facilitation of humanitarian solutions. Qatar's diplomatic efforts are crucial at this time. Well, that statement spurred this reaction from former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who responded, the Israeli government is making a serious, moral and practical error. Qatar is not an essential partner for humanitarian operations and diplomatic operations. Qatar is the enemy itself. It finances, assists, and strengthens the terrorist organization Hamas. Israel's stated goal is the destruction of Hamas. Qatar's goal is exactly the opposite, saving Hamas. Well, for more, let's go now to our correspondent in the Gulf, in Dubai, Bastian Burri. And Bastian, let's talk about Hamas. Let's talk about Qatar and Hamas, especially these comments today. Qatar seemingly to indicate or giving hope for some major breakthrough in the hostage talks.
Well, name another country that has fruitful relations with the four main players in this conflict, namely Hamas, Israel, the US, and Iran. There's only Qatar. In Gaza, in the West Bank, the Qataris keep Hamas on one side, the Palestinian Authority alive on the other, to keep millions of Palestinians afloat, promising and actually spending billions of dollars for them to develop their infrastructure, hospitals, education system, and so on, even though it was proven that Hamas uses a part of this money to develop its military capabilities and, incidentally, to maintain the rather comfortable lifestyle of its leaders. As for the US, the Americans have made Qatar their best non-NATO ally. They arm Doha without counting the cost and defend the interests of its royal family in many international issues. This situation means American investment in Qatar, advanced military equipment sold, and geopolitical interests supported by Washington. As for Iran, we know that the Qataris maintain deep relations with Iranian intelligence services, and there are huge shared economic interests between the two countries, including a large natural gas field in the Persian Gulf. And finally, with Israel, well, the relations can be considered excellent as they are non-existent, but they're still very opportunistic. These relations exist. The Israelis say it more or less publicly on a pretty regular basis. As you just said, they recognize the positive role of the Qataris in Gaza. Tzachi Hanegbi said it today, but Benny Gantz used to say that a lot as well. And let's even remember that Qatar was for a long time, long before the Abraham Accords, back in the 1990s, the only country in the region to do business, often secretly, with Israel.
Right, certainly have, and many Israelis have been to Qatar, officials, and some like myself as well. Bastian Burri, thank you for that. Well, we're joined in the studio by Shelley Tal Meron. She's a member of the Knesset for the opposition Yesh Atid party, and she's a former, of course, Israeli Air Force officer, spokesperson, instructor, and that'll come relevant too. But Shelley, I want to just start. I don't know if you heard President Joe Biden speaking just now, a few minutes ago, talking very in great detail about what we maybe call in Israel the day after the war, right. Talking about the two-state solution, that it should lead to a peace process. Now, of course, your party, which is still still supporting the government in the war, but has talked about also the day after. I know your Yair Lapid, the party leader, is to give some kind of press conference or press statement tomorrow. But let me get your response to that, because President Biden seems to be pressing the current Israeli government, even this emergency war government, to say you have to start thinking about the day after Hamas is gone.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Kalev. You know, my party and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid spoke about the two-state solution in the past. I think it's been said and done by many other leaders in Israel. And of course, we are a peace-seeking country. But right now, I think we're focused on the war. We're all united. Even us as an opposition, we're supporting the government from the outside. And we're focused on the war, winning the war, destroying Hamas, demolishing this terror organization. And of course, we are all concerned about the future and what's going to happen in Israel. But right now, we have to focus on the war, on destroying Hamas. And I think President Biden said it with his own voice a few times, that they support this strategy. And that's what we need to do for right now. And later on, of course, we will have time to discuss the future, to ask questions, and to understand where we're going.
Well, let's discuss the war for a minute, Shelley, because you are a former Air Force operations officer. Right now, reports today of a major bombardment in northern Gaza, especially directed against the tunnel system that some call the metro there, and a lot of discussion in Israel whether the Air Force has the capability on its own through the air campaign to really knock out those tunnels, enough of those tunnels to set the stage for the ground invasion. And based on on what you can tell us in your knowledge.
Well, as you know, I spent almost 7 years in the Air Force, and I also served in reserve for many years. And we all see that the Air Force is the major force that's being used right now by the Israeli army. I think that I won't go into strategic details and all the military plans that we have, but I think that as long as the Air Force can destroy from the air without endangering our soldiers and destroying as many targets as possible, that's good for the state of Israel. To go inside Gaza has a lot of meanings and challenges, and as long as we can destroy targets from the air, we should do so. Of course that there are targets that we can do from the air and some we cannot, but I think that in the past we've also shown that many of the targets can be demolished by the Air Force. And I think today there was also some sort of publicity in the media about one tunnel that was caved in from the air. I just came back from
well, tell us, but they just came back from the southern Gaza area, but I just, at this very minute, it is coming. There are air raid sirens in Zikim, in the Tivasara, at the Erez crossing. So right now, that where you were is coming under fire. Tell us about, though, what you saw down there today.
Well, it's been a rough day. I went there to the kibbutzim.
Sure.
And I visited Kfar Aza and Be'eri. And I have to tell you, it's very different from what you see in pictures and videos on the media when you go there, and you see the life that was lost. Right? You go into a family's house and you see the pictures on the wall, and you know that they're no longer with us.
Right.
You see the blood, you see the destruction, you see the amount of weaponry that was used to kill them. Really, it's inexplicable. It's something that you cannot describe in words. The atrocities that we're seeing there is impossible to comprehend. I'm saying it because it's very difficult to understand. And when you walk into this family's house, and I've been there to many families, it looks like a war zone. It's heartbreaking. And one of the things that you cannot describe until you get there is the smell. You smell death. You smell death.
Ariel Osron, a Middle East correspondent, was also in Be'eri today, and he mentioned that specifically, the smell there, the smell of death. Over 2 weeks, it was still 2 weeks past the incident, and bodies apparently discovered, 4 bodies discovered in that vicinity, still at this stage.
Right. When I was there today, they discovered a few bodies, and some of the homes and some of the territory there was burned. So it's very difficult to, I think, to find all the remainings of some of the people there. And it's truly a war zone. You see destruction. You cannot even, I felt like I was in Afghanistan. It didn't feel like my country. Israel is a Western, modern, democratic country, startup nation. I'm so proud of my country. I served in the army. I had a career over the years. And you walk into these kibbutzim and you cannot believe what you see with your own eyes. It's really, you can't describe it. And also, I just wanted to tell you that, I've been wearing this for a few days. I don't know if you've seen it, but this is a necklace that was given to me by Brothers in Arms, the organization.
Right. Let me explain for our viewers. That is the Organization of Reserve Officers that achieved notoriety earlier this year as part of the protest movement against the judicial reforms. Some of them saying that they may not volunteer if the judicial reforms would proceed, but on the day the attack happened, they mobilized themselves. They said they will support the government, they'll cease all protests, and have dedicated themselves to bringing assistance to Israeli civilians affected by it, in fact, establishing a huge operation here in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, so I went there. First of all, I have to say that you're very correct. The day that the war started, they called all of the reserve soldiers to come to duty, and everybody reported to duty. So I went there to support them because they have an amazing, let's call it squadron room, right? They have thousands of volunteers there. It's all very organized in different sections, and they gave this to me. This is a necklace. Our soldiers use necklaces.
Sure,
right? Yes, exactly. Yeah. So they made this one with both sides. One side says our hearts is in Gaza for all of the people that were taken as hostages, and the other side has the Star of David. And ever since they gave this to me, I've been wearing it, and you know, our hearts are in Gaza. We're waiting for them to come back.
Right, for the hostages
to
come back. I want to move now more to the situation in the Middle East. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met in Cairo today with the French President Emmanuel Macron. He also spoke to his military commanders, and he had some interesting things to say to his troops. Let's take a listen to that.
Beware not to allow the illusion of power to drive you to make a decision or to take a step that you later realize you didn't properly think through or which was driven by your rage or high spirit. I am saying this to the armed forces and to the Egyptian people. We always deal with all crises rationally and with patience to achieve what is possible without extra use of power or abilities. Regarding the developments in the Gaza Strip, let me tell you that we are playing a very positive role in containing the current escalation and trying to de-escalate things in order to stop this conflict, reach a ceasefire in one way or the other, and stop the bloodshed happening now.
Ariel, some interesting comments there from Sisi, almost cautioning his troops just not to, in a sense, get involved in presumably the situation in Gaza, especially as it develops further. Clearly, he has some concerns about that.
I also think that message was aimed for Israeli leaders to keep tempers low and not to engage when is not necessary. This is the same Sisi that deployed hundreds of special forces soldiers to the Rafah crossing to keep that area safe in case Palestinians start running to the fences. And that is indeed an actual possibility as the more this war moves on, progresses, especially when there's a ground invasion. Those who have left northern Gaza and moved south are going to go further south, and those who have not yet left the northern part of the Strip, they will make their way south when Israeli troops come in.
Daniel, the spokesman, was very forceful about that. It's just
if you're a life-seeking individual, you will leave the area because you know that life is further south in the Gaza Strip. And as this progresses, since October 7th, we've seen both President Sisi of Egypt and King Abdullah of Jordan outline their main concern. They do not want to take Palestinian refugees. Right. That is their red line. And as the war progresses and the humanitarian situation in Gaza gets more complicated, more dire, they will try to exit in one of two places. Israel, they cannot exit because Hamas terrorists destroyed the crossings into Israel. That leaves one crossing, the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. That's why hundreds of special forces of the Egyptian military are there. That's why every chance Sisi gets, he's warning of the forced displacement and a second displacement of the Palestinian people. But at the end of the day, what has him most concerned is the fact that Palestinians might want to make their way into Egypt. He does not want to collect any refugees. And another thing that President Sisi will need to give answers to is how there's amid reporting in the Wall Street Journal that in the month prior to what happened in October 7th and September, at least 500 Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist fighters went to Iran and they received special training there by the Quds Force. The Quds Force commander was also there. Kani was present during these trainings. And how did they make their way to Iran? There's only, like I said, there's one exit from Gaza, and that's the Rafah crossing. So that's another thing that President Sisi will need to answer to when he talks to Israeli leaders, not only the fact that he does not want to get any Palestinian refugees.
Right. I just want to jump down to the south, the Gaza border area, and our Hamda Salhut. And Hamda, give us an update. We have reports of air raid sirens going off just in the last few minutes there.
Right, Kalev, you can hear actually these explosions right behind me. The Israeli military continues to pound targets inside of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military spokesperson saying earlier today we struck several targets inside of the Gaza Strip, both above ground and underground, making it easier for the next steps in this fight, meaning the impending ground operation. The outgoing artillery fire from the Israelis has been constant, and the booms are only getting louder. The airstrikes have been continuous. We just saw a short while ago rockets coming off of the Gaza Strip going into those southern communities like Zikim. Red alerts, we could actually hear them from where we were, though we didn't have one in Sderot where we are now. The Israeli military is saying that they're preparing for this ground offensive. However, inside of the Gaza Strip, Hamas and both Palestinian Islamic Jihad are saying that they're also prepared to fight the Israelis there. The Israeli military has been preparing, doing training exercises in tunnels to prepare themselves for that warfare that will be happening at any point in time now, Kalev.
All right, Hamza Salchut there on the Israel-Gaza border. Thank you for that. And Shelley, as the fighting goes, it's already happening, but as the fighting goes on, certainly we're going to hear more calls for, I won't even say ceasefire, the phrase now is humanitarian pause, pressure being put on Israel. There's a dispute over, for example, allowing fuel into the Gaza Strip. The international community says it's needed for hospitals. Israel says there's fuel in Gaza. Hamas is holding it. And the question is how Israel is going to be able to balance that international pressure, including from its closest allies like the U.S., with the need to carry on its military campaign.
Well, first of all, you know, we've seen, our intelligence has shown yesterday, I think, the pictures of the gas that it's within Gaza. So there is gas within Gaza, within the Gaza Strip, and I think that we should all remind ourselves what happened 2.5 weeks ago, right? Because the world sometimes forgets how this whole thing started, right? This war was imposed on Israel. We were surprised one time, but we won't be surprised again. It won't happen again. The state of Israel is prepared to anything that it will need to front, right? So the balance is not something that I think we can discuss. Every time people say humanitarian aid, of course we do not want any civilians to be hurt. Of course we want the population to go from the north of Gaza to the south. Let us all remember that Hamas is preventing from their own population to go down south in order to use them as human shields. We must remember that fact. And we need to remember what happened 2.5 weeks ago. Nothing humane about what they did to our people. This was done by a terror organization. I think calling them ISIS is a compliment. They're worse than ISIS. This is a new generation of terror that the world has not seen. This is a second Holocaust. And I think that the world should know that this will not stop with Israel. It can happen everywhere. In Europe, in Asia, wherever. This is a terror organization, and the world needs to stand united against this terror organization. So, of course, I want the people to be safe, both sides. We don't want to harm civilians, but we have to protect our citizens as well. We were attacked in a brutal way. This was a huge massacre. I saw it with my own eyes today. Also, I see videos and footage of things that we're not seeing all around because it's very, very graphic and it's very difficult to see it. But I've seen it today, and I'm telling you, the world has not seen such violence in modern history. It's horrible, it's horrific, and the world should condemn this and remember who started this horrible war.
Well, on that note, I do want to go back to our Batya Leventhal, who said Dizengoff Square in Tel Aviv, that exhibit of teddy bears paying homage to the children, the many, many children who have been taken hostage into Gaza, Batya.
Absolutely, Kalev, and it's been a very moving tribute here all evening. In fact, the whole day that we've seen it. But something that has also been very pressing is the psychological trauma and effect that this is having on the citizens of Israel. And it's perhaps not talked about enough, and maybe that's because the full extent, the scope, the scale of it is not known yet, and it's not going to be known for a long time. But an organization that is trying to make a difference on the ground right here at Dizengoff Square, as so many people throughout the day have been coming to have a look at the vigils, is an an organization known as Psychology First Aid. And with me is one of the co-founders, Techelet Bresler. Techelet, tell us a little bit about what your organization is doing and how it started.
So we started 9 months ago at the protester in Israel. We are psychologists and social workers that came from all over the country, and we started with 2 chairs on the street, and we welcome people to sit with us. We know that a lot of events can be really hard for a lot of people now, and the events here are really traumatic. And we want to help stop the traumatic events to be post-traumatic afterwards, from the understanding that there is not 9 million psychologists and social workers in Israel. So we're on the street and we welcome everyone and anyone who need us through all the squares and streets in Israel and come to find us.
I want to point out to our viewers that the service that you're offering is free. Do you have a message for some of the audience that's in Israel at the moment that needs an ear to talk to?
We are free here for you, and we believe that when we talk with each other, we can feel so much better. Not to be alone in this time, it's really important. And to be with people here, we can see a lot of people just sitting together, not really talking, but just sit together. It's a really, really important for afterwards. And where it's a psychologist and social workers that can be and really give some impacts for that and some advices. It's not a therapist, but just the supports that everyone now needs.
Thank you, Techelet. So as you can see, Kalev, obviously a very traumatic time for the state of Israel, but a time when the people are really coming together. So they are sitting here at the Dizengoff Square, pulling up chairs. You can identify them in their blue shirts. For some of the audience that is watching and that needs somebody to talk to, they are here, they are listening. The point is, again, this is the paradox of the heart of Tel Aviv, where we are right now, a square that we have seen so many people coming to set up vigils, but also people that are just coming because they need to have that solidarity. Kalev.
All right, Batya Leventhal at Dizengoff Square, thank you for that. And Shelley, you were talking earlier about that spirit that you saw, for example, earlier with the Brothers in Arms and the need that has to be fulfilled. I don't want to get too much into the political sphere. There are questions about whether the government is fulfilling these needs. And again, your party leader has been critical of its actions, I would say, on the home front, not the military sphere, on the home front, and a lot of volunteer groups trying to step in and fill those gaps.
Well, first of all, you know, yesterday I went to the health committee. We were discussing exactly what she was talking about, because there are a lot of people in Israel who are suffering from trauma right now.
The health committee of the Knesset of Parliament, of course.
The health committee of the Knesset. And I went to this discussion because it was very important to me to say that we have a whole generation now of children who are traumatized from this. You know, I have 2 daughters at home. One is 17, one is 13, and they're asking a lot of questions. Are they safe? What's going to happen? You know, we have to treat all these people, and the country is making a huge plan of how to treat all the people, right? Maybe through the system, maybe through schools. We'll see how we are going to do it, but we're working on it. Yes, sometimes we have criticism over how things are done, but we try to cooperate together and find solutions that we can solve all the issues that we have to treat in the home front. I think the major thing right now is money, is funds.
Right.
Who do you direct the money to? And we think that we should direct the money to the families who need it right now, to the businesses, to everybody around, and later find the solutions, you know, within legislation, etc. Right now, we have to help the people in the home front, which is the wounded people, the families that were hurt, the small businesses, etc.
People who are homeless, basically.
Exactly. They're refugees within their own country. We have to understand that.
We should say.
Like 120,000 from north and south. Right. And we have to remember that these families need to rebuild their life from scratch, right? They have no homes, jobs, they have to go to some sort of schools for the children. It's very complicated.
A daunting task, and that will be a challenge for months, and perhaps even years to come, certainly in terms of rebuilding those communities and dealing with the psychic scars as well as the physical scars of this conflict. Shelley Tal-Meron, Member of Parliament for the Yesh Atid Party, thank you for joining us again in studio. Gentlemen, I'll ask you to stay with us. We have more coming up on our special report on I-24 News. News. It's day 19 of Israel's war with Hamas. The battle goes on in the south, in the north, and in the international arena of public opinion and diplomacy as well. We'll have more when we're back in about 3 minutes. Stay with us.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. And during the course of this program, we've spoken more than once about Kibbutz Be'eri, where more than 100 people were killed on October 7th. And there are bodies, even today, 4 bodies that were found in the vicinity of the kibbutz more than 2 weeks after that incident. Many more need still to be identified. Dozens more members of Kibbutz Be'eri had family members kidnapped into Gaza. But there were also those who were more fortunate that terrible day. One is Dr. Elon Palker, a survivor of the Kibbutz Be'eri massacre. He's now one of those internal refugees we spoke about. He's in the Dead Sea area, and he joins us now. Elon, thank you for joining us. First of all, tell us what happened, your story on October 7th. How did it unfold for you and your immediate family?
First of all, I'll tell you that the evening before, we had the 77th anniversary of our foundation. The Kibbutz Be'eri was founded before the foundation of the State of Israel. And it was a wonderful celebration. And then we went to sleep very proud on our communal community, very strong one, very a social high-level abilities and really strong community. And then we waked up in the morning. We heard the noise of rockets. It happens, but we gradually understand that we are in a very unusual, unprecedented event. We understood gradually that a lot of terrorists, Hamas terrorists, got inside the kibbutz, and my children are bigger, so they have their apartment, but me and my wife were in the safe room. Gradually, we were in the safe room, but inside something like a battlefield. And I was one of the luckies, as you say, one of the were lucky enough that they didn't burn my apartment. I didn't have to make the choice between be killed by the smoke that got into the safe room or jumping from the windows and being killed by this terrorist. That really, as a human being, I can't understand their behavior. But for 15 hours, sorry, me and my wife, we were inside a battlefield. Think about your home that became for a moment like a battlefield of the World War I, something like that.
Right. Let me ask you: were you aware of I just want to say there were air raid sirens right just south of us in Rishon LeZion and I believe Bat Yam, and we're hearing explosions from the interceptions as I'm talking to you. But I am staying in the studio, so we are under fire here. But Alon, I want to ask you: did you have any information while you were there about the magnitude of the events unfolding, or did that only come to you realization when you came out of the safe room? And if so, what was your reaction when you realized what had happened?
So no, the terrible thing is that we understood it gradually during time in life, because we have a WhatsApp net inside the kibbutz, and we start understand that they burn houses, that people are killed, that people are kidnapped. We knew, I'm an historian, and after some hours, I understood that I am in unprecedented event, and that the world that was won't come back again. We will be in different world, in different kibbutz, in different relationship with Gaza Strip. There is no possibility. We understood that the Hamas organization, that it's something, as we show it on this or that Saturday, these people are something between ISIS and the Nazis. Their behavior, it's out of the human being family. So we understood that things will definitely change, gonna change, and the life we had, we won't have again. The kibbutz we can rebuild it because it's a strong community.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, Alon, because we've had in the studio two people that were down there today, by the way, said it looks the smell of death is still in the air, and they said they didn't feel like they were in Israel. They thought they were looking at scenes from some other part of the world. The devastation is so great. Is that community going to be able to rise again after this kind of cataclysm?
Okay, I'll tell you the truth. We're a strong community, and we can rebuild our kibbutz, but in under some conditions. First of all, look, our army wasn't there. We have to we have to trust our state again. The state wasn't there, but this is an internal Israeli issue. Then it can't be anymore that the Hamas will control Gaza. Nobody in the world would agree to live nearby a territory that's controlled by ISIS. The free world decided before some years to destroy ISIS, and now the free world must back Israel while Israel gonna destroy Hamas. It's impossible. These people or these animals or even monsters are not part of the human being. And look, I'm a peace supporter, okay? I can agree that the Palestinians has rights, but there is no connection between a behavior, a Nazi-style behavior that we suffered from that terrible Saturday, and a liberation struggle of the Palestinians, or how we will call it. It's just two different things. I just can't believe that the BBC don't call them terrorists. It's impossible.
Right. Okay. I just want to say we do have live images. While you're speaking, we did show live images of the rocket interceptions here in the just south of our studio in Tel Aviv. Dr. Alon Pauker, I guess really you have to thank God for you're being saved from that situation. And
yes, I was just lucky, but think about your community. 10% are not with us anymore. It's unprecedented. You can't imagine. I even don't understand these numbers when I say them. So it's really terrible, and it can't be anymore.
Well, may Kibbutz Be'eri rise again, stronger than ever, yes. God willing. And thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you very much.
All right, we do want to go have an update on, because as we were speaking, we could hear in the studio, Ariel, the booms from rocket interceptions, presumably, and perhaps what information do we have?
So according to MADA, Israel's emergency services, medics have been sent to a direct impact in Rishon LeZion. Still don't know if there were any injuries in that, but there are believed to have been direct impacts in this latest salvo of rockets from Gaza to central Israel.
Right, it covered a wide swath of a territory. Owen, there's some news out of the United States that's political news that really more about U.S. politics, but it has some repercussions for Israel, especially U.S. aid to Israel.
Yeah, Caleb, obviously we're all focused on the war, as we should be, and as we're giving that coverage to our viewers, but of course there are other things going on elsewhere in the world, and the United States now has a new Speaker of the House of Representatives. It's Mike Johnson, a previously relatively unknown Republican, but he was able to do what those before him were not, which is get the votes needed to become Speaker of the House of Representatives. Presumably this will enable the House to be able to function and use its normal procedures and pass legislation. And obviously front of mind for us here in Israel, and I, in some sense, hope for those sitting in the U.S. Congress, is the aid that Joe Biden wants to give Israel. And, of course, also Ukraine and Taiwan and the aid for the projects in the U.S.-Mexican border.
Which was being held up by the failure in the U.S. House of Representatives to appoint a speaker and to move that process along to approve that emergency aid to Israel.
Right. So it remains to be seen whether this will do the trick. But in itself, I suppose, good news for Americans that the House has a speaker and will be able to resume its normal functioning. And again, a reminder for those of us sitting here immersed, as we should be, in all that's happening around us, that, of course, the rest of the world continues to do its business as well.
It continues to do its business, but it is certainly much of the world consumed by what is happening here in Israel. And as we keep stressing, this is not a localized conflict, not even a regional conflict. It is a international conflict, even, and more. You mentioned that Wall Street Journal report earlier. There was also indicating the U.S. moving and perhaps delaying the ground invasion, Israel's ground invasion, in order to move advanced air defense systems, boost its air defense systems, covering U.S. assets in the Middle East, Ariel, in places like Iraq, even on the ground in Syria, as well as in the Gulf.
And rightfully so, because just a few minutes ago, pro-Iranian militias in Iraq issued a statement saying that they struck a U.S. base in the country. Now, since October 7th, there have been at least 13 of those kinds of strikes on U.S. troops and assets in Syria and in Iraq. Add to that the fact that the U.S. Navy ships already intercepted not only cruise missiles but drones that were sent from the Houthis in Yemen north, believed to be making their way to Israel. They downed them. There's also reports that Saudi Arabia downed one of them. But irregardless, the U.S. is already engaged. Shots have been fired from actors that are not just on Israel's immediate borders, and the U.S. is trying to better its positioning.
All right, I want to go down to the Israel-Gaza border, Hamda Salhut. And Hamda, we've been getting sirens in this area, reports of hits. What are you seeing down on the ground there?
Well, actually, Cleb, there's a flare directly behind us here. Several explosions in the distance. You can hear those as the Israeli military continues to pummel at these targets inside of the Gaza Strip. These are flares that either helicopters or Israeli aircrafts are letting into the air. The rocket fire continuing also at this hour to target southern communities. We also heard in the distance small arms fire, an indication of perhaps exchanges of fire between Hamas and the Israeli military. military along the border. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the closest point at the moment that we can get to as press. This is a completely militarized zone. The only people who are here are journalists and the Israeli army, because they have evacuated all of these communities. Now, the Israeli military is saying that they are hitting targets even harder tonight, both via land and air, to pave the way for the next steps of their operation, indicating a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Prime Minister speaking earlier today, not giving a lot of details about when the measures will begin, but saying that they were imminent. The War Cabinet also convening this evening to discuss that as the airstrikes and artillery continue at this hour, Kalev.
Yeah, things certainly seem to be intensifying in that border area. Hamda Sahut, thank you for that. Now, as we mentioned earlier in the program, the U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres continues to try to, let's say, qualify his initial comments, not apologize, but qualify his initial comments in the Security Council yesterday, in which he framed the Hamas atrocities committed against Israeli civilians by saying they, quote, did not happen in a vacuum, and then listed a series of Palestinian grievances that for some seem to justify the actions. Here's Guterres' latest comments on those widely criticized statements.
I am shocked by the misrepresentations by some of my statement yesterday in the Security Council, as if I was justifying acts of terror by Hamas. This is false. It was the opposite. In the beginning of my intervention yesterday, I clearly stated, and I quote, I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring, and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. End quote. Indeed, I spoke of the grievances of the Palestinian people. And in doing so, I also clearly stated, and I quote, but the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, end quote. And then I went on with my intervention, referring all my positions on all aspects of the Middle East crisis. I believe it was necessary to set the record straight, especially out of respect to the victims and to their families. Thank you.
Well, joining us now is Israel's former ambassador to the United Nations and now Likud member of Knesset, Danny Danon. Danny, thanks you for joining us. Mr. Ambassador, you heard the Secretary General's reply to the criticism that's come from Israel and elsewhere about his comments. What's your response to that statement?
I'm very disappointed. I hope that today the Secretary General would retract his shameful words from yesterday and would make clear that he made a mistake, but he was not able to do it. And let's go back to yesterday. What he said yesterday was full justification for the horrible terror attacks against Israelis. He basically explained what happened to the poor Palestinians, and because of the occupation and because what's happening in Gaza, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It's unacceptable. We cannot accept such a language. That is why, we went on the offense. We demanded that he will resign or retract his words. And I will tell you that. I know Secretary General very well, Kalev. I spent many years with him. He's very smart, very knowledgeable about the anti-Semitism, about the Holocaust. And I would expect much more from him.
Right. Danny, we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu speak in some detail, maybe the most detail, this evening. He talked about the ground invasion, laid out very clearly the recovery of hostages and destruction of Hamas's capabilities as the main goals. And he addressed the question of the ground operation. Many people in Israel asking when it started. He said there are factors that people may not know about. Let's talk. Maybe you could just what do you say? What do you to Israelis who are wondering when is the next phase of this war going to get going?
Caleb, I sit on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and we have many very long discussions every day. And I tell my colleagues, it's not about when. It will happen in another day or two, a week. It doesn't matter. We can wait. But the main question is, what are we intending to do? And I urge the Prime Minister to understand that this time we have to go all the way. We cannot do half of the way. We cannot go to parts of Gaza. We have to complete the mission and to eradicate Hamas completely. So yeah, I speak with the soldiers and the commanders. They are eager to go into Gaza. You know, we know that we have the kidnapped Israelis there, babies there. They feel that it has to be done yesterday. But I think, you know, we can take the time, a few more days, but we have to be very strong about the goals of the war, and the goal should be very clear: full eradication. You know, in the past I had many arguments about different cycles. I think today 99% of Israelis would agree with me that we have to finish the job.
All right. I just want to say, Danny, we are showing there was a hit. You know, we had, well, you're in Tel Aviv, and, you know, there was sirens in Rishon LeZion, just south of Tel Aviv, and we are showing live footage. Apparently, there was a direct hit there in Rishon. We don't have any information on what the situation is. We'll bring that to you as we come. But one more question, Danny, because one factor, of course, weighing in to the question of perhaps a ground operation is hostages. Whether there might be more deals or more freeing of hostages by Hamas. Maybe you could relate to that. And also a very unusual comment by the National Security Advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, today, praising Qatar for its role in some of the hostage releases. I wonder your reaction, if you have any reaction to that.
So we have to walk in two parallel lines. You know, one line is to go and to defeat Hamas, and at the same time we have to bring the hostages back. So we're going to work with anyone who can help us with that, whether with the Qataris, the Egyptians. We will work with everybody. But, you know, we have experience with the Qataris, so we have to be very careful about their intentions, about what they are doing. But when it comes to Pidyon Shvuim, to bringing our boys and girls back home, we will do everything we can.
All right, Danny Danon, as I said, former Israeli ambassador to UN, now Likud member of Parliament. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News. And we are looking there. That's a channel feed from the Channel 12 News. A hit on any news coming out, Ariel, on what the results of that impact in Rishon LeZion.
Yeah, a direct hit to a building in Rishon LeZion.
To a building.
And also there is a man lightly injured in a Kfar Sirkin, if I'm not mistaken.
Kfar Sirkin, yes. That's a little...
Also in Central Israel.
Central Israel, yes.
Close to Petach Tikva,
right.
lightly injured from rocket impact.
Inland, again, we're seeing clearly there was some damage to a structure. The lightly injured, that was in Rishon?
Kfar Sirkin.
That was in Sirkin, so we have no information.
Yeah, emergency teams are making their way to the scene, as in the next few minutes we should get a clearer picture as to the current situation in both of these sites.
Okay. Again, a reminder to viewers, of course, because of the Iron Dome system, the rockets generally, especially for those who are able to get to safe rooms, generally do not present a danger physically, a physical danger to Israelis and to Israeli population centers. But of course, the system is not foolproof. And as you're seeing on your screens, buildings can get damaged, people can get injured, and God forbid, there have been fatalities over the course of time.
And that just illustrates the importance of listening to Homefront guidelines and making it to the secure room.
No matter where you are in the country, don't feel secure because you're in Rishon LeZion or in the Tel Aviv area. You should make it to as possible to a safe room. I just want to have one thing out of the U.S. We mentioned Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, just made a statement out of Washington, quote, "The first bill I'm going to bring to this floor of the House of Representatives in just a little while is in support of our dear friend Israel." So we'll see.
Welcome news here in the Holy Land. Of course, very, very important aid that will be very welcome here, and the public here will be very thankful for.
Yeah, so earlier we reported on a significant significant military activity focusing on the northern part of the Gaza Strip that is not limited to airstrikes and artillery. So my understanding is that this activity is still taking place, with the targets being key commanders in Hamas, as well as military infrastructure. That explains the heavy firepower that is employed.
Also the gunshots, the gunfire shots that reporter Hamda Salhout said she heard gunfire that would fit in with that.
It could fit in. I am not aware of those reports, but it could fit into what's happening. Yes.
Okay. Gentlemen, I want to go, since I want to stay focused on the south for a moment, where, of course, much of Israel's Bedouin community lives in the southern Negev desert. It's been one of the most areas impacted by the Hamas rocket attacks, as not only are these Bedouin communities close to the Gaza Strip, but they actually rarely have air raid shelters or even warning sirens. Now members of one Bedouin community are coming together to find solutions to this burden of war. Nicole Tzedek has more in this report, which was adapted from Israel's Channel 12 News.
In a legal village with no formal name, now in mourning. 60 Israeli Bedouins live in this village in the eastern Negev. On October 7th, they were on the front line against Hamas rockets. Traces of the attack are still visible throughout the village. Rocket shrapnel on the ground and cars torn apart by the impact, all bearing witness to the violence. But it's the people who are most affected.
I have 4 cousins who died in front of my eyes. It's a disaster. A rocket fell on the village around 6:30 a.m. We all ran to see what happened, if anyone was hurt. There was only material damage, so we moved away and sat down in a tent, the whole family. Gradually, the people dispersed, and there were just 5 people in the tent. Shortly afterwards, a missile fell on the tent. 4 died, and 1 is still in hospital.
Given the urgency of the situation, the Israeli army provided concrete shelters the day after the war began. But these makeshift shelters aren't reassuring for the local residents.
The situation is bad, as our villages are not officially recognised. The state considers them wastelands. So we don't have any warning sirens, barely any shelters, miserable concrete blocks that were brought in the day after the attack, but it was too late, and many families don't even have this.
Since the beginning of the war, the Bedouin community has suffered at least 19 deaths from Hamas. Some by rockets, others killed at point-blank range during the terrorist incursions of October 7th. A traumatic experience for the entire community.
The majority of casualties in the Bedouin community occurred within 48 hours of the attack. We lost around 20 people. There were many wounded and 7 hostages. We were on the front line. Many of us live below the poverty line, and half of the people live outdoors. These people have no protection. People are traumatized.
Nevertheless, the Bedouins are getting involved. Volunteer initiatives have been set up to help both the Bedouin community and the region's Jewish inhabitants. In Hura, east of Beersheba, an emergency council has been set up. Since the beginning of the war, leading members of the Bedouin community have been meeting twice a week to evaluate the situation and find solutions to the most urgent problems.
We are all meeting here to provide solutions to the lack of shelter unorganized Bedouin volunteers who want to help. What's more, over 60% of the Bedouin community is under age of 18. So how can we continue to provide them with an education in wartime? We have to set up a remote education system, but half of the children live in unrecognized villages with no access to internet, so Zoom doesn't work.
Initiatives that try to lighten the burden of war for populations still in shock.
And Ariel, I understand there is some news out of the north of the country, potentially.
Yeah, so the council of the Yarmouk River area, that's south of the southern Golan Heights, are instructing all locals to remain at home due to a suspected security incident. We've been receiving many reports like these since October 7th. Some have been found out to be true, others not, but now the instruction for the locals in that area to stay at home in the vicinity of their home inside due to a suspected security
briefly,
incident.
The cabinet meeting tonight, I believe, still going on, so there may be news out of that, some developments, maybe
right.
decisions.
Again, so many rumors surrounding what happened in Gaza City over the last few hours. Maybe by the morning Israel time we'll have more clarity. And yeah, a question about the next steps, whether it be ground invasion or more emphasis from the air. One quick update from the United States from our correspondent Mike Wagenheim. Mike Johnson, the new House Speaker, wants to prioritize a resolution expressing support for Israel. Not clear what he wants to do in terms of prioritizing the funding.
Right, and many Republicans object to the Biden administration approach of pairing that funding to Israel with funding for Ukraine. So we'll have to see if the Biden administration can square that circle. That ends this particular broadcast on I-24 News, but please stay with us. Eli Hochenberg will be taking over the anchor's chair. Lots of news developing this evening out of Israel, so stay with us as day 19 of Israel's war against Hamas comes to its close. Thank you for joining us.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Get bacteria in your blood. So be careful, the catheter.
The American red wolf is the most endangered wolf in the entire world, and the American red wolf is the only wolf that is only native to the United States. And in that regards, they should be a national treasure. So it is a privilege to be able to provide their medical care, and it's very important for people to be aware of this species and want to understand them so that they can be protected in the wild and not go extinct.
Breaking News Edition, I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Israel's right to defend itself against terrorist organizations is set to be scrutinized at the United Nations in New York soon. At the same time, sirens sounding in southern and central Israel just a short while ago, warning of incoming rocket fire. A direct hit in the central city of Rishon LeZion just a short while ago. 4 people are likely injured. It's 19 days since the Hamas killing rampage in southern Israel saw more than 1,400 people shot, tortured, and butchered. More than 5,400 people were wounded. Confirmation today that 4 more bodies have been recovered in Kibbutz Be'eri. Identifying bodies has taken this long given the brutality of the attacks. Now, if you listen to the interrogation of terrorists caught since the 7th of October, you will hear the clear instructions Hamas gave them to kidnap and kill Israeli civilians. At this hour, at least 220 people are still being held hostage inside Gaza. The hostages come from 25 different countries, ranging in age from a 9-month-old baby to an 89-year-old man. They include Holocaust survivors and peace activists. Now, Qatar says it's working on some kind of breakthrough for their release. Israeli media is now reporting that Jerusalem is considering an exchange deal for women and children to be freed. These are just reports. The IDF has conducted a spate of airstrikes on scores of Hamas terror sites in the Gaza Strip, both above ground and underground, as the country waits to hear when a large-scale ground incursion is likely to start. The Wall Street Journal reporting Israel has agreed for now to a U.S. request to get its air defenses in place to protect American troops in the Middle East. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, take a look at this picture taken in Beirut today. Senior leaders of 3 terror groups, Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah, Ziad al-Nakhleh, the head of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group, and Hamas deputy chief Saleh al-Aruri. Now, for the latest updates on the ground, we go straight to our correspondent, Hamda Salhut. She is near the Israel-Gaza border. Hamda, sirens sounding in Ashkelon, Nativa Asara just moments ago. You're close to the border. What update can you share right now?
Right, Benita, and just 2 minutes ago, sirens also sounding in the southern city of Ashdod. You could hear booms in the distance behind me as the Israeli military continues to pound targets inside of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military spokesperson saying today that they are pounding targets both via land and air, and this is in preparation for their next moves, meaning the ground operation when they go inside of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Prime Minister speaking earlier today saying that he's not going to give much information about the ground offensive, but that it is in fact imminent. So the Israeli military is saying they are targeting heavy Hamas infrastructure. On the other side of the fence inside Gaza, scenes of destruction, black plumes of smoke continuously because of the military's bombardment on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military is saying they're preparing for this ground offensive. So the intensity of the strikes is actually going to get harder as they need to pave the way for the next steps of their plans. Now, in the distance, we also heard several rounds of small arms fire. The Israeli military lighting flares from the ground to illuminate the way to see if anyone was perhaps approaching the fence. But we heard several rounds of small arms fire. You can hear those booms in the distance now as the Israeli military continues to hit targets inside of the Gaza Strip, both with fighter jets and with artillery. Benita.
Thank you so much. We will be coming back to our correspondent, Hamda Salhut, live on the Israel-Gaza border. Stay safe, Hamda. And as Hamda was explaining, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressing the nation in a televised address just a short while ago, explaining that while exact details around the next steps Israel will take can't be publicized right now, light will triumph over darkness. Quote, "Together we will fight, together we will win." Let's take a listen.
We are bringing down lethal fire on Hamas. We've already killed off thousands of terrorists, and this is just the beginning. And we're also preparing for the ground offensive. I'm not going to give any specifics on when, how, and how much. I'm also not going to specify the various considerations we're taking into account. Many of these considerations are not known to the general population in Israel, and that's a good thing because we want to protect our soldiers' lives. I would like to be clear. The timing of the IDF operation was determined unanimously by the cabinet in charge of this war, together with the Chief of General Staff and together with the cabinet. We operate in order to guarantee the most optimal conditions for our troops for the upcoming activities. And when we get into Gaza, and then later on, we're going to get those murderers who committed these horrific events of Hamas, ISIS, to pay the full price. October 7th was a very dark and black day in our history. We will fully investigate what had happened at our southern border, the border with Gaza. Everybody will have to provide answers, myself included, but all that will happen only after the war.
And now, for more insight, we welcome to studio Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, former military secretary to 3 ministers of defense and former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, and international affairs analyst Dan Perry, former Europe editor at the Associated Press and former chairman of the Foreign Press Association. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here in studio. So, Eitan, I'm going to start with you because the nation is waiting to hear when this ground incursion is going to happen. Listening very carefully to what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say, reports in the Wall Street Journal that they need to wait a little bit because the U.S. needs to get its ducks in a row in terms of its bases with U.S. troops. What is your take? What is your latest assessment?
To make it shortly, before I will explain it, I think that the nation cannot hear it from the Prime Minister in the press. The nation got a very clear message. We are continuing. When, how, what kind of way of tactic operative, this will be known only when it's happened. And this is the way it should be worked for the safety of the soldiers, for the start in a success way for fulfill the mission and the targets. But secondly, I think that the Prime Minister tonight tried to bring few messages to the nation. First of all, we are continuing in our main 2 goals. And there was a goal at the beginning that was not mentioned on the same level. The main goal is still, of course, to destroy the Hamas terror structure and to prevent it to continue and to be in Gaza in any kind of effective way. Secondly, is the release as we can do as more for all the kidnapped people, from children till elders, soldiers, female and others in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, there are also one clear effort with the international community, which is very well coordinated. Can remember such a visiting of major leaders from Europe, from the States, in every day, one after the other. It means they are here for covering the umbrella of something that above us, and I mean towards the north. And the Prime Minister said we continue with our main mission is to destroy Hezbollah terror structure, and we will do it. And Hamas, yes, thank you. And Dad always thinking about Hezbollah. Tomorrow. Yes, about Hezbollah. And I think he also signaled another thing about the unity of the war cabinet that has been established by him. It's very important in these days to show they don't have to agree with each other. That's not the reason to establish such a cabinet. They need tense other views, etc., but the decisions are taken together. And the last but not, I think, least is the fact that he said we will come and check ourselves from him. First time he mentioned himself with kind of giving answers, not mentioning responsibility, but we are moved a step above about it. And he is right. We have to put it on the side and fulfill our duty towards the Israeli population.
Dan, I want to bring you in on that because Benjamin Netanyahu is saying everyone will have to provide answers, but the time is not now. The time now is on making sure that Israel remains, that Israel can exist.
This was the most non-apology apology and the most non-mea culpa imaginable. I mean, one official after another, anyone who had anything to do with this catastrophe comes out in the past weeks and says clearly, I bear responsibility. What I'll do with that, whether I'll resign or not, is a whole separate question. but they don't deny they bear responsibility. Now, we hear the Prime Minister, who is more than anyone the author of the idea that it's pretty cool to have a terrorist group running Gaza because that weakens the moderate Palestinian Authority and makes it less likely that Israel will be corralled into a two-state process. That was his idea. I didn't hear any taking of responsibility. I heard him say that we must check what happened, and everyone will answer questions, and I also will answer questions. So thank you very much. But this is not anything resembling a taking of responsibility, and for it to be treated as such, I have to say, is the soft bigotry of low expectations. That Netanyahu lives on a whole other planet where responsibility takes entirely other forms than it does for mere mortals.
What we are seeing, however, right now is a very divided country up until now is now united. So politically, people were divided before this war started, and right now the focus, many will say, is just on being safe, eliminating Hamas, eliminating the terror threat, and making sure that what happened on the 7th of October never happens again.
Absolutely. What we're actually seeing is a tempering of the anger that had been behind the divisions. You still have voters on one side and the other, but I mean, evidence suggests, anecdotal and poll evidence, that there has been a sea change in the political landscape, and there is anger against the government. But that anger is not manifesting itself in daily events because it's less important in most people's minds than prosecuting this war in which the people are united. I mean, it is quite remarkable that I would say that when the government speaks of the goal being to remove Hamas from power, if indeed that's the goal, Netanyahu did not say it today, but if that's what they're trying to do, the people understand it as that, there's consensus behind it, and a willingness to pay a very high price, and I think Israelis know very well that the price will probably be high.
And what he did say is the soul of the nation is bleeding, and that certainly is true. Gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to come back to unpack lots more right now, though. Our correspondent Pierre Steckelbach is in northern Israel. And Pierre, Hezbollah and the IDF exchanging fire across that Israel-Lebanon border earlier. Talk to us about the latest developments where you are. What can you share?
Right, Benita, the latest IDF statement saying that the Israeli Air Force has been targeting Hezbollah targets in the southern part of Lebanon, destroying or targeting specifically a watchtower and a military compound belonging to Hezbollah. Earlier, Israel has been targeting 3 squads trying to launch anti-tank missiles toward Israeli territory. One squad succeeded in firing 1 anti-tank missile towards the community of Avivim, towards an army base there. Israel has been striking back there as well. That comes all after rocket sirens were heard in the community of Kiryat Shmone in the eastern part of the Israel-Lebanon border. 4 rockets being launched earlier this afternoon from southern Lebanon into Israel. They all fell into an open area and did not have to be intercepted there. No reports of injuries. That comes also after 1 rocket was fired towards Haifa, but not from the north, where all of our eyes are at, but from the south, from Hamas in the Gaza Strip, using one of their long-range missiles there, but the missile exploded mid-air. Rocket sirens were heard in the area of Haifa and southern communities there. Benita, that all happening against the backdrop of that meeting between Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah with in Beirut, with the leaders of Palestinian Islamic Jihad Ziad al-Nakhleh and one senior Hamas official Saleh al-Aruri. Today, earlier this morning, one meeting where those 3 Iran-backed groups were speaking about the following steps to take in that what they call sensitive point in time here, what they should do in order to bring about the victory of what they called the resistance in Gaza there. One of those many meetings that we've been seeing between Iranian-backed groups there in Lebanon throughout the year. That comes only about 2 weeks after the Iranian foreign minister met with Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, in Beirut. And Hassan Nasrallah specifically has been emphasizing throughout the year that his goal is to combine the fronts there, the northern front in Lebanon, Hezbollah, with the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and also the West Bank. And this is what we've been seeing here today specifically.
Live in northern Israel, close to the border with Lebanon. Thank you very much, correspondent Pierre Steckelbach. We will be coming back to you, Pierre. Stay safe meantime. And now we go to Tel Aviv, and we're joined by our correspondent, Batya Leventhal. So a little bit earlier, sirens sounding in many parts of central Israel. What update can you share where you are? What is the latest there?
Right, Benita. Well, thankfully, no sirens here, but they did blast off in Rishon LeZion as well as Holon, which is not too far away, as you pointed out, in the center. But what's happening here at Dizengoff Square, which was really the heart of Tel Aviv, is a vigil. And usually the visuals include some candles that have been lit and also memorials that have been set up for those that have been murdered by Hamas. But tonight, a different kind of visual. I'm going to move out of the way so that you can see it. What we're looking at is 30 large teddy bears that have been blindfolded. Some of them have even been bound together. There's some memorial candles near them, but they all hold an individual placard of a child with their name, their age, and the fact that they have been kidnapped by Hamas. We don't know the conditions that these children are currently in the Gaza Strip, and there's no telling the torment, the trauma that they have gone through, their innocence completely whitewashed. But what is evident is that there is a chance to bring them home, and the Israeli public very clearly wants to make sure that this is on the public consciousness at all times, that yes, we are engaged in a war at the moment with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but we still have innocent hostages, innocent children, the lives of children, and this was very important to bring up to a lot of the activists that put them here earlier in the day. It's the children that need to be focused on. It's the children that need world and media attention to be able to bring them home safely. These are not combatants. These are not IDF military personnel. They are innocent young children. And so this being made very clear, we've also seen a lot of foreign media here tonight as well reporting on the same thing. It's difficult to see a visual like this and think of any other way that the media can possibly spin this. Yes, there's always two sides to a coin. Yes, there are innocent children on the other side of the border as well, but they are being put in harm's way by terrorist organization Hamas. Whereas here, they are being protected and trying to be protected. And obviously our government working very hard to make sure that the steps are taken to engage in both the war and minimize civilian casualties, but also knowing that they have the hard job of making sure that a lot of these children, a lot of the hostages in general, are brought back to Israel safely.
Thank you so much, correspondent Bacha Leventhal, live from Tel Aviv. Thank you. And now, talking of those children, let's turn to the latest rhetoric out of Qatar and Turkey. The foreign minister in Doha saying negotiations with Hamas to release more than 200 people still held hostage in Gaza continue. Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, who is also Qatar's prime minister, saying there is some progress and they remain hopeful. The head of Israel's National Security Council, Tzachi Hanegbi, taking to social media to say he is pleased to say that Qatar is becoming an essential party in the facilitation of humanitarian solutions. Meanwhile, it was a standing ovation in the Turkish parliament for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan when he told his AK faction party that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. He is also cancelling plans to visit Israel because of what he calls its inhumane war. Israel rejecting this, saying Hamas is an abominable terrorist organization that is worse than ISIS, that it brutally murders babies, children, women, and the elderly, takes civilians hostage, and uses its own people as human shields. So, still with me in studio, our panel is here. And Eitan, I want to start with you because top of mind in the hearts of all Israelis right now is the release of these hostages. What do you make of the plans? How seriously do you take them? Your thoughts?
I think that at the beginning, the goal of the release of the kidnapped people, from the children and the others, was not enough on the same place as the goal of destroying Hamas structure. But I think there were some occasions that brought it to such importance. First of all, I think that we are in an open window time to make it, and it was very clear because Hamas got it on a way by dislegitimation, and it came from the sponsor of Hamas, Qatar. And for Qatar,
irony is not lost on anyone.
Qatar, we have to speak on another way because, in my opinion, Qatar is the main source, root, and architect that made this kind of operation without putting the fingers and creating it. And I think that Qatar realized what happened with the hostage is giving it a kind of a crisis towards Qatarian double way or dual way of foreign policy that they are using and playing with everybody all over the years, covering their main ideological way, and they made the pressure on Hamas, and this is the opportunity that we have to use. The second is the duty. After what happened on the 7th of October, Israel's duty, our duty, is to bring all of this group back home, because they are civilians or soldiers, but they are as a result of the failure of those who were responsible for the security of Israel from the military point and from the political point, and we have to bring them as soon as possible back home. So now, and the third is the Israeli street that has realized what happened and started to raise it, and by right as the important thing now for the country. Hamas will not disappear. Even after the operation we will do, they will not disappear. It will take time to reach the goal even after the main operation. We have experience, but if we will be in a different way of military policy towards Hamas, we will achieve it on some time during the coming timetable. But releasing the group of the kidnaps is something that is in our heart, in our mind, in our way as a nation, in our duty.
Dan, Qatar finances Hamas. Qatar hosts Hamas. And yet, potentially, these are the brokers that may make a difference. Your take?
It's absurd. I watch the world sometimes in utter stupefaction, honestly. When abnormal things become normal, when unacceptable becomes acceptable, the world has some leverage over Qatar. Qatar wants to be accepted as a member in good standing of the community of civilized nations. They host the World Cup. They pretend to be a normative country. I would hope that if the world wanted to do something useful, the West, they would apply maximal pressure on Qatar with a carrot as well as a stick, that they can do that. They can maybe get the Sunni world to stop being a little bit nasty towards Qatar. For a while there, they were totally ostracized by Saudi Arabia and other countries in exchange for understanding that it is no longer acceptable in any way, shape, or form to support Hamas. I would absolutely make it a global goal of Israel's. Maybe even before blundering into Gaza with tanks rumbling, to completely isolate Hamas. To punish any country, any organization, any individual that provides sanctuary for, funding for, assistance for, or even negotiation with Hamas. After what happened on October 7th, Hamas needs to be removed from the rank of organizations that one can deal with and not expect to be a pariah oneself.
Well, to that exact point, what then do you make of Recep Tayyip Erdogan saying Hamas is not a terrorist organization? One wonders how he would define the PKK right now, but that we can park for the moment.
Surprised? Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is a guy who's happy to call any Kurd in Turkey a terrorist, practically.
Well, let's be honest, there were efforts at some kind of warming of relations between Israel and Turkey. He was supposed to be visiting soon. He's obviously cancelled that, as we know.
He is speaking, and we know the guy. We know it. He will come back to the circle and will climb up and will move around the circle. But the main problem is Qatar. Let's not play the games. Qatar built this kind of murder organization by cheating Israel and find a way of cooperation inside Israel from the fact of coming inside. Do Israel bring the money to civilians with a lot of money that we were not observed or allowed to bring Hamas. Hamas, who gave the Hamas the opportunity to produce kind of money for producing missiles or rockets. They don't need to give them the papers how to do it. They gave them the resources for this kind of things. They gave them the shelter to be in Doha. They give them the umbrella to play around the world without taking attention. Their way of policy is not different than Hamas, because they played like a way of being received by the West, and on the other end, they dig the way of bringing their ideologic of terrorism, of the extremist Sunnis, as they really believe. And this is a country of 1 million people with a lot of money, which is very have tense with Iran or have their own problems, and also tense with Saudi Arabia and tense with Egypt, but on the other hand, creating a situation recently like a very nice sunshine with empty clouds, but above it was a darkness. They continued the sponsored. But now we need them. We need them to bring back the hostage and the life of the people that are now in tunnels inside Gaza is the responsibility of Qatar, as the same of Hamas.
Sounds like we agree on Qatar. As for Turkey, the answer may be more in the realm of the psychological than the political, I must say.
I agree.
Dan, a ton, stay with us. We've got lots more to discuss on exactly that front, though. But right now, we are taking a very quick break. Our breaking news coverage continues in just 2 minutes. Our team of reporters is out and about in the field. Our experts stay here in studio. So stay tuned to this breaking news edition.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I-24 News.
Was born in Manhattan, raised on Long Island, within the Jewish community.
Any type of visitation of these hostages, knowing if they're dead or alive.
The presentation behind us represents 220 families.
This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. And across the political spectrum, Israeli leaders continue to condemn UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, with opposition leader Yair Lapid saying his comments at a Security Council session on Tuesday had, quote, brought shame upon the UN. The UN chief's comments since then have so far done nothing to temper that storm. Our senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman has the details.
Even for Israel at the United Nations, it's a new low, with continued anger in Israel Wednesday over the comments of Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York a day earlier.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation.
Mr. Secretary General, in what world do you live? Definitely, this is not our world. Saturday, October 7, will go down in history as nothing less than a brutal massacre.
Families of Israeli hostages went ahead Tuesday with their meeting with Guterres, but Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen canceled his meeting. Israel began denying visas to UN officials. Ambassador to the UN Gilad Erdan called for Guterres to resign. And the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Wednesday had this to say.
Those who seek to understand look for a justifying context, do not categorically condemn the perpetrators, and do not call for the unconditional and immediate release of the abducted, fail the test. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres failed the test.
Guterres took to the podium Wednesday to explain. Israel remained unimpressed.
I am shocked by the misrepresentations by some of my statement yesterday in the Security Council, as if I was justifying acts of terror by Hamas. This is false. It was the opposite.
Israel and UN institutions have had tense relations for decades, with Israel feeling UN bodies and UN officials do not give Israel's claims a fair hearing, that the United Nations has a deep-rooted anti-Israel culture. That has not always tainted the Secretary General himself, which is why the fury over Guterres' comments is news. And the storm comes at a sensitive time, with UN agencies a key force in the Gaza Strip, making this a high-stakes diplomatic fight for all involved.
And for the latest out of the United Nations, the United States and Russia have put forward rival plans to help Palestinian civilians caught in the war, a humanitarian pause suggested by Washington, or a ceasefire pushed by Moscow. Both countries seek UN Security Council resolutions to address shortages of food, water, medical supplies and electricity in Gaza. But the US has called for pauses to allow aid to enter Gaza, while Russia wants a humanitarian ceasefire. So for more, let's go to our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from the UN in New York. So, Mike, lots to unpack. Let's start with that major fallout over those comments by Antonio Guterres about the Hamas terror attack. He initially said it didn't happen in a vacuum. Talk us through the response and his updated remarks. How is that all going down there?
Well, there's obviously a huge disconnect between what Guterres thought he said and how it should be interpreted and how it actually is. And it's not just some crazy politico out to get attention for himself, Eli Cohen or anybody else. As he mentioned, and as Owen mentioned, this was across the Israeli political spectrum. We're talking about Benny Gantz, who called Guterres' comments essentially terror-enabling. This is a Benny Gantz who literally had Mahmoud Abbas over his house for dinner. We're talking Yair Lapid, the opposition leader, who made the two-state solution the focal point of his UN General Assembly speech last year. So there's obviously a disconnect and a chasm between as Eli Cohen said, the world that Guterres lives in and the world that Israel lives in. There's been no retraction or anything like that from Guterres, and according to his spokesperson, there's been no other ambassadors or envoys who have said anything, though his spokesperson admitted even if they did, he wouldn't say so publicly.
And Mike, the latest now on those two alternative resolutions at the UN, one by the US, the other the Russian Federation. The US wants this humanitarian pause. Russia wants a humanitarian ceasefire. Where do things stand right now?
Well, it's not so much what Russia wants. Russia wants what the U.S. doesn't want, which is why they're essentially dual resolutions right now. The U.S. calling for humanitarian pauses, calling for a safe passage for those that need to be evacuated, calling for the provision and distribution unimpeded of humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, Russia calling, as you mentioned, for a humanitarian ceasefire and the revocation of Israel's order for Gazans to evacuate the northern part of the enclave, among other items. But it's obviously a U.S.-Russia battle here, more so than it is an Israel-Hamas battle. They've gone to closed consultations here in the Security Council chamber behind us. It's very clear that there's further negotiations and talks that need to be worked out on both of those resolutions. Russia has already indicated, if not explicitly, then implicitly, that they would veto the U.S. resolution. Meanwhile, a Russian resolution on this same topic failed to garner the necessary votes last week. Very unclear they would have the votes this time around, and even if they did, very clear the U.S. would veto it. The Maltese ambassador to the Security Council in the UN, Vanessa Fraser, told us that the E10, the group of European 10 countries, they would put forth their own draft resolution should both of these resolutions here today fail to pass.
Mike, stay with us. I want to unpack a little bit more about President Joe Biden. He was speaking out in Washington just a short while ago during that press conference, talking about a range of issues, including the day after the war. Let's take a listen.
There's no going back to the status quo as it stood on October the 6th. That means ensuring Hamas can no longer terrorize Israel and use Palestinian civilians as human shields. It also means that when this crisis is over, there has to be a vision of what comes next. And in our view, it has to be a two-state solution. It means a concentrated effort for all the parties, Israelis, Palestinians, regional partners, global leaders, to put us on a path toward peace.
President Joe Biden mentioning there the two-state solution amongst other suggestions that he didn't talk about so much when he was here not so long ago. Wrap up for us what he did say.
Well, he had two separate appearances today on camera, both in the Rose Garden and in a joint presser with the Australian Prime Ministers visiting the White House. He was asked about a number of topics related to the conflict. Number one, the comments that Benjamin Netanyahu made that a ground invasion is imminent. He was asked if he sought assurances from the Israeli Prime Minister about holding off long enough to negotiate the release of the hostages. He said he'd indicated to Netanyahu that he would prefer that happen, but didn't demand it. In terms of minimizing civilian casualties, Biden indicated that Hamas's numbers can't be trusted. However, Israel should be doing all that it can, even in very difficult circumstances, to limit those civilian casualties. He did say the U.S.
Seem to have lost it.
Indicated that they would, under any circumstances, provide Israel with all that was necessary to make sure that they were able to defend themselves. He said, quote unquote, that's a guarantee.
Senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim updating us there from the United Nations in New York. Thank you, Mike, and apologies for that short technical hiccup there as well. Still with me in studio, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, and Dan Perry, International Relations Expert. So let's start with you, Dan. Lots to unpack here. First of all, your thoughts on Antonio Guterres and his comments, fallout, walking it back, but not really walking it back. What do you see into this?
He's a creature of his environment, which is the UN, and indeed Israel. The Israeli narrative, to use a word I hate, is not that popular in a General Assembly. He's more the head of the General Assembly than the head of the Security Council. When he says that the attack didn't happen in a vacuum, to an extent, that's always true. It's true of all things. Nothing happens in a vacuum. But of course, you have to be spectacularly tone deaf to say that in the context of your first public statements about a massacre of 1,400 people. It's going to sound like you're being an apologist for it. So it would be a little bit sad for poor Guterres if he had reached his advanced years and hadn't figured that out. It sounds like a bit of a faux pas, a bit of a gaffe, frankly. But it probably comes from an emotional place where he's thinking of the General Assembly and knowing that making a statement that sounds purely pro-Israel, and it's a little bit sad that to just simply condemn a massacre as pro-Israel, might have been unpopular. I don't know what more to say. It's a little, it's not his finest moment.
And certainly if any person, whether you are the chief of the UN, wherever you are in the world, whether you are in the loop about the Middle East and the dynamics here, if you saw the brutality, if you saw the depravity that was filmed by Hamas when this rampage happened, a human being cannot be anything but outraged.
Of course, obviously. But here's the problem with that, okay? When Israel carries out reprisals in Gaza, actions in Gaza, when it bombards Gaza knowing that there are human shields and that those human shields may die, that creates terrible scenes in Gaza. And I think if Israel assumes that people will compare the two things, human shields dying at Israel's hand because Israel had no choice but to do the bombardment, versus maniacal terrorists, probably drugged up to boot, running around southern Israel, raping and pillaging, they're going to know the latter is worse. I think Israel may be disappointed, because there is this endless loop of constant death and destruction that causes many people to be confused about who is right and who is wrong.
Eitan, take us into the war cabinet. We know that leaders have got huge plans, not only in terms of Hamas, but Hezbollah, which you made mention of earlier, up north as well. How much influence does the US concern, rhetoric out of the UN, anywhere in the globe right now, Middle Eastern players that we were talking about earlier, have on the plan of action? Israel wants to destroy Hamas, and it needs to do that.
I think that with my experience, first of all, I must say something about the UN Secretary. Give me 10 seconds. Shame for him, shame for the General Assembly, and shame from the free world. And I think this guy should be removed from his job. And I'm serious. I know we are dealing about a world, but how can it be when the blood is still on the floor, and what you see and what you watch, coming a man making a speech like a dry man without any feelings, doesn't signal anything, just to be okay with his fellows from the Arab world. And we know about this kind of context. This guy should be blocked by thousands of people who send him a demand and the net at everywhere they can, and demand that he will leave his job.
You're not the only one saying as much.
Secondly, I think that above all in the cabinet, from my experience, of course, we are a free country, and we are identified for the main goal for our mission in this war or when there is escalation. But we are not disconnected from what's going above us. This area, the Middle East, start with Hamas, and it's a local Israeli problem, but I think that the world, and above them its United States, are aware that this threat from Hamas is a threat for future from what Iranians are making in the region. So you have to take, first of all, for your country, we are 24 hours, assess all the time the situation with the North. I'm sure about what happened today in Beirut. By the way, it's not something special. You have to, this murder plan was prepared for a long month, and as it was prepared for the murderer, it was prepared for the defend. What will be Israel's reaction? Hezbollah is very in a high readiness, even what's going in the north. They didn't do anything till yet. They are able to do. So all the time you are measuring, balancing, checking, and taking on account, of course, the master of this region, the United States. We have to deal with them, we have to create, we have to coordinate, and maybe we have to cooperate.
Stay with us, gentlemen. We've got more to discuss, but right now I want to bring in Ophir Metzger, whose grandparents, Tammy and Yoram Metzger, have been kidnapped by Hamas and are being held in Gaza. Ophir joins us from Eilat. Ophir, I cannot imagine what you and your family are going through right now. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Take us back, if you will, to Saturday, the 7th of October. You and your family live in southern Israel, near the Gaza border. Talk us through your recollections.
That day started with sirens. We went to the safe rooms. We started to call our family that lives closer to the border in Kibbutz Nir Oz. And then we stopped getting any messages from my grandparents. And at the time, we continued talking. My sister was at my uncle's house, so we continued talking with her. She was telling us that she can hear terrorists all around the kibbutz. They could hear it from inside of the safe room, and they could hear them coming inside of the house and breaking things, and they heard shotguns and so much noise. And later, when they got out of the safe room around 4 p.m., so they've been there since 6:30 a.m. at the morning until 4 p.m. Then some people did, they walk and went inside houses, and they saw that my grandparents are not there anymore. There were not signs of a fight, so we just guessed they just took them. And a couple of days later, we got a message from the army that they located the phones of my grandparents inside Gaza. And now we don't know their condition, and we don't know if they're dead or alive. We don't know what horrors they've been through, and we just watching videos and to keep and search them in videos. And have you seen those videos? They are horrible.
Horrific.
And
absolutely horrific.
So I just hope that they're okay. I hope they didn't suffer like the people in those videos.
Right.
And these days are so hard because my dad and family, we are originally from the same kibbutz. I was born in Kibbutz Nir Oz, and this kibbutz has been through a massacre. So many people were murdered, and women raped, and children beheaded, and horrible things that should never happen in this world. And this, we never thought that this size of massacre will happen. So this is a great reminder for the world to understand and know that Hamas is a terror attack, a terror organization.
Right.
Sorry. And this is the thing that he does. And now it's going in Israel, but it will come to Europe too, and to the US too, and to everywhere.
Ophir, it's something we've been talking about right here in studio right now, the impact of what is happening and how it's been seen around the world, and the reaction as well. As you well know, 4 hostages have so far been released, including 2 elderly Israeli women. How did you feel when you saw Yocheved Lifshitz and Nurit Cooper back in Israel? Does it give you and your family some sense of hope? You obviously heard Yocheved's account of what she went through. How did you and your family feel seeing and hearing this?
So first of all, we are all happy. We know them. Yocheved was my dad's sport teacher when he was young, and Nurit was working with my grandpa at the paint factory in Nir Oz. So we are happy that they're okay and they're here. But honestly, it's not enough. Two people out of 200 and more. It's not enough. We want them all to come back. We want them all alive. And the world can't just say it's enough and just, okay, think Hamas is so humanitarian and nice. It's not nice. And there are still more than 200 people inside of Gaza, and we don't know their condition.
And tell us a little bit about your grandparents. What are they like?
My grandpa is very funny, always tell the same jokes, makes very good food. My grandma too. I wear her earrings and her necklace. She gave them to me, and my sister has another pair. I sit at their house with them every weekend. My grandpa used to make me like small sandwiches with a smile on them. And we talk and we tell each other a lot. We are very open with each other, so they know me very well and I know them very well. And they used to tell me about their childhood and in the kibbutz and everything.
Right.
And yeah, they are very nice people. We just celebrated my grandpa's birthday, 80th birthday, and it was so nice because all of my family was together, and yeah, it was so nice. And we just hope to celebrate his next birthday too together.
And I'm sure that they are very proud of you as well. Ophir Metzger, we hope your grandparents will be returned home. You are in our hearts. Your family is in our hearts, and your grandparents are in our hearts as well. Thank you very much for being here with us. Dan Perry, perhaps we need to send that to the UN.
I mean, what the fortitude of that young woman is beyond all comprehension.
Unbelievable. And to think what these families are going through as we sit here talking about what plans might be in place to potentially get her grandparents back home.
It's a global historic drama. You couldn't script it more incredibly. I'm stunned. It's amazing to behold.
Who dreamt that we will talk about returning of a grandfather or grandmother
and a
or
baby.
Release of babies and mother without her babies and children? Who think about such scenario and never estimate that I will have to sit here and to speak, and this is something that we will have to carry with us. We will not understand how it happened to us on the 7th of October. It must be clear. But we know we have no time now to think about it, and we have to correct it immediately, because as you see, and with the evidence that are coming by the IDF from these terrorists, here is a letter and from a phone call and from the others, you see what is really was behind it, and if you're not succeed to prevent it, what will be here the end of the Israeli state. This is a war that is not a nuclear. This is a nuclear human behavior.
How, Eitan, did Israel not see this coming? How did
and
Israel
fail to react for 4 hours, 5 hours? I mean, and let them drag people back into Gaza unmolested. What on earth?
Training camps were apparently set up just across that border. The intelligence failure here, when you listen to a young woman like that, waiting for word on her grandparents, talking about the relationship that they have. How did this happen?
I really cannot give you the answer how everything among the way it should be stopped in places where it should be stopped. And we have press signs from the intelligence and from the operation and from all the discussions. And when you see the atmosphere, I think we will have to dig it very deep and for time to study from it a very tragic lessons. And we will have also to see how the situation in Israel, and Hamas and Hezbollah said it, and Iran very loudly, that the internal situation in Israel was a catalyst that moved this kind of backwind they feel in their situation, their motivation to do it in a success way, because they feel that above the weakness of probably what they find out, and it was well planned by these people, that the atmosphere of Israel gave them the belief that they can do it, and they said it loudly towards many months. But I said now it's time to leave it on the side, and now it's time to make what we have to do with Hamas, and later we have to sit and do it very deeply and intensively.
Dan.
You know, I have to say, sure, that sounds good, Eitan, obviously. But we know very well who we're dealing with on the political side in Israel. If they prolong the war in one way or another, don't declare it over for a year or so, it is very clear that the hope will be that by then everything will be confused and there will be a whole new reality, and those responsible will more or less be allowed to get away with it. I think whereas some things are very complicated, in some ways it's also very simple. Israel, over the past year, more or less joined a global bandwagon that was predicted in the movie Idiocracy. And the idea was that you can elect incompetents and fools, and everything will somehow be okay. And I think the piper was paid on October 7th. We had incompetence, and it is not okay.
I think that the goalkeeper is the Israeli nation. Israeli nation is now fighting thousands of people for the future of their families and the future generations. And they will not give any politician and anyone who was involved in this case to find a way to escape from this fact. And I think the main hero, you asked at the beginning about the unity in Israel and the situation. I think I can assess that around 75% of the population understand together what is the need for the country.